Okay, first video talking about very famous Korean cultural series prepared by government-owned broadcast or something like that. And they explain Korean history. Of course, they are talking about the aspect of South Korea. So this is typically overseas people understand Korean history. Who are they? It's different from Japanese people describing about Korean history and Japan. It's different. This is the right word. Brief explanation in Japanese on this video. I just summarize. Just read it. No explanation. Before starting video, just briefly Japanese description. Could you read this? Oh, this is talking about after World War II, so they don't telling about Japanese wrongdoing before World War II. So they are talking about 40 years military regime in Korea. So after World War II, they had a lot of turmoil, coup d'etat and assassination and so 1987 they at first they started the democracy, right? 1987, yeah. 1987. So very recently, just only the 1997, only 30 years the experience for democracy. No?
Yeah, but the last sentence was 1993. It's 1993 when the country.
No. Actually, 1987. This is notable. Is going to be elected. The first time he just tried to consider, even though he came from military. Okay. Yes, just 30 years. So very shallow experience for democracy. But also he is that country is still swaying which direction to go into, United States side or China side, and very unstable. This is a very good video. Just have a look. 30 minutes. By the way, did you get it? I uploaded on his Facebook.
Yes.
For this one. This is my second book. So this one is 14 series. This is very good video they prepared. At the aspect of Korean side, not Japanese side. So kind of they are talking about independence of Korea, and they never talking about good things. They do not favor for Japan. And overseas people, they evaluated this Korean English material they prepared. Japanese people, almost none of those materials Japanese prepared for this Korean history. So all English material is favor for Korean opinion.
Hello everyone, this is Sammy Jung. I'm the host of KCS, the program developed by the Cyber University of Korea in the spirit of public service. Today, we're going to take a look at the road towards democracy in the modern history of Korea. This segment in modern Korean history follows the chronology of events. The partition of the peninsula during the post-war power vacuum that followed Japan's surrender in 1945. The birth of the Republic of Korea in this...
Okay, this is actually, Korean didn't start their Republic of Korea from 1945. They started in 1948. Then immediately they get into the Korean War.
The South and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea in the North. The Korean War from 1950 to 1953. The struggle for democracy in the Student Revolution of 1960. The coup d'etat of 1961. And finally, democratic development since 1993.
So she said 1993 that I before and I thought 1987 because this is because of how we're going to define this democracy to start. 1987 is notably is come from military. That's the reason why she said 1993.
These are important historical events that the author of this series, Chung-Soon Kim, experienced at first hand.
This segment of the most modern history of Korea sounds as if it is my life history. Some of the incidents took place some 70 years ago, yet my memories of those times are vivid. During my college years in Seoul, as the post-Korean War government, led by Lee Seung-man and his Liberal Party, was tilting increasingly toward autocratic rule, I was an active participant in the April 19.
Oh, why this English sentence and what he talking is does not match? Because this is translated into Korean sentences into English sentences. Okay? Doesn't match.
Student Revolution
Originally is Korean
in
language.
1960s, which brought down the First Republic.
Japan's drastic unconditional surrender that ended World War II on August 15, 1945, left Koreans unprepared to organize their own government. The country was already in disarray by political fighting between right-wingers and communists and their sympathizers. Meanwhile, the peninsula was divided in two along roughly the line of latitude.
Okay, just 3 years after World War II, until South Korea independent, this area is Korean Peninsula is managed by Soviet, China, and US. Maybe Britain is including or not, but I forget that. But this is kind of how do we say sort of group organized government.
Latitude at 38 degrees north, with the Soviets controlling northern Korea and the U.S. supporting the south. Although the official announcement of the peninsula's division along the 38th parallel was made on September 2, 1945, the U.S. had actually planned this division before the end of World War II. The initial decision to divide Korea was made in an all-night session of the U.S. State War Navy Coordinating Committee on August 10th and 11th. Overcoming all the opposition, commotion, and demonstrations, South Korea was able to establish a new republic named the Republic of Korea on August 15th, 1948, with support from the UN Temporary Committee.
So usually Korean people, how to pronounce the name of those people is very difficult. recently, Moon Jae-in, like that kind of name is popular, but we so-called it after World War II, we said Lishoban, but Lishoban nobody knows. Syngman Lee is Lishoban, Syngman Lee.
Lee Syngman was elected president. In the meantime, Soviet-supported North Korea established the Democratic People's Republic of Korea on September 9, 1948. While the Lee government was busy strengthening its anti-communist stance, at dawn on Sunday, June 25, 1950, North Korea attacked South Korea along the 38th parallel.
Okay, 1950, North Korea attacked South Korea.
The South Korean army was caught completely off guard. On the second day of the war, the South Korean army had to give up Uijeongbu, the gateway to Seoul. North Korean tanks reached Seoul on June 28th, the third day of the war. President Lee Syngman assured frightened citizens over the radio that he will make every effort to secure the capital city. On June 25th, at the request of the United States, the UN Security Council passed a resolution calling for the immediate cessation of hostilities and the withdrawal of North Korean armed forces to the 38th parallel. The Security Council also called upon all UN member countries to render assistance in the execution of the resolution. Concurring were 16 countries, including the United States, Britain, France.
Okay, this is the organ of those countries, right? Against North Korea.
Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the Netherlands, the Philippines, Turkey, and 7 other countries.
So just at that time, Japan is still not independent, not including these countries. Soviet and China is for North Korean side.
These 16 nations constituted the UN forces. On June 29th, 300 planes under UN command entered the Korean peninsula, followed by the arrival of UN forces in Busan on July 1st. The Security Council authorized the United States to designate a commander of the United Forces. Thus, President Harry S. Truman named General Douglas MacArthur commander-in-chief of the UN forces. Nevertheless, the tide of the war was not easily reversed. The UN forces continued to retreat. By the end of July,
at that time, American soldiers very eager to battle against North Korea and Chinese soldiers because they tried to protect communism penetrating into free world, rather than like a current Afghanistan, current Middle East. American soldiers, they don't want to work against those people because they don't have kind of objective or target to understand or recognize or understand their soldiers why they are battling against.
July, North Korean troops occupied most of the southern peninsula. These forces ferreted out reactionary elements, including members of the South Korean armed forces, police, anti-communist rightists, and many others who became subject to arrest, imprisonment, abduction, and persecution. There were innumerable massacres by the communist occupation authorities. The North Korean authorities forced the residents of the occupied area to collaborate with the People's Army of the North. Many South Korean political leaders, scholars, intellectuals, and prominent writers who were unable to escape Seoul were kidnapped and forcibly taken to the north. While most of South Korea had fallen under northern control on September 15, 1950, MacArthur's forces made an amphibious landing at Incheon, and the tide of the war turned abruptly in favor of the United Nations. Seoul was recaptured, and the UN forces broke out of the Busan perimeter. As the North Korean army retreated northward, the UN forces crossed the 38th parallel and marched north, securing the area to the Ammogang, the river that forms the present-day border between North Korea and China. The war then took a complicating twist as Chinese People's Volunteers appeared at the front in October and November. China had mobilized a massive number of volunteer soldiers who swept over the area in continuous waves without concern for high casualty rates. In a military
It's a whole soldier. So many soldiers coming from north to south. So many. Many people dead.
maneuver that came to be known as human wave tactics. As to the magnitude of the human wave, the UN command estimated that about 486,000 enemy troops, or 21 Chinese and 12 North Korean divisions, were committed to the Korean front, and that reserves totaling over 1 million.
Actually, more than 1 million soldiers, Chinese, came to the Yalu River, and finally they like 1 million soldiers anyway.
Men were stationed near the Amogang in Manchuria or on the way to Manchuria. The Chinese and North Korean troops were able to halt the advance of UN and South Korean troops, forcing them to withdraw from the area they had occupied in North Korea and relinquish the city of Pyongyang on December 4th, 1950. During this retreat, the largest number of North Koreans to flee at one time also moved south. Koreans refer to this winter retreat as the January 4th retreat.
So this is actually the history of North Korean history, 1951, and Chinese military, not Soviet, Chinese military get inside South Korea. So North Korea, Kim Il-sung never forget those support by Chinese government. Kim Jong-un is the same.
However, the retreat
Okay, this sentence is what she's talking is different.
actually took place in late November and early December 1950, not on January 4th, 1951, which was when Seoul was taken by the Chinese People's Volunteers. The military decision to abandon Pyongyang and the subsequent flight of Pyongyang citizens across the Taedonggang resulted in bedlam. The damaged iron bridge over the river had not yet been fully repaired, and many desperate refugees made dangerous maneuvers on the broken, crooked railings as they tried to cross the river. Some fell to their deaths in the waters below, others were severely injured. The retreat was equally dramatic from the area of the Hungnam Pier, located on the sea coast in the northeastern part of North Korea. When Chinese troops crossed the 38th parallel and entered Seoul on January 4, 1951, the South Korean government and the UN troops pulled out of the city and abandoned the port of Incheon. Once again, they had to deal with the evacuation of refugees. During the winter months of 1951, the war consisted of attacks and counterattacks to the south of Seoul, and in early March, UN troops began to make substantial gains and move steadily forward. Then, on 14th of March, UN troops moved once more into Seoul, which by now had changed hands 4 times.
So very hard battle, huh?
The UN forces fought their way to the 38th parallel, and on April 4th, they broke through the line, opening the door once again for a northward march. On April 11th, Truman relieved MacArthur of his command and replaced him with General Matthew Ridgway. When the tide of the war turned in favor of the United Nations under Ridgway's command after UN troops and South Korean forces had successfully pushed the invading forces north of the 38th parallel. The Soviet Union proposed ceasefire discussions among the...
Actually, Soviet Union didn't involve this war. China did. So, Kim Il-sung disappointed Soviet Union, Stalin, and Stalin's attitude.
The participants in the war. The Truman administration was eager.
Again, they tried to consider negotiation at the line of 38th.
To end the fighting now, that it was possible to re-establish a division of Korea near the 38th parallel. When the rulers of China indicated their interest in a truce, Truman authorized Ridgway to begin negotiating with enemy generals. The talks opened on July 10, 1951 at Kaesong, and on July 27, 1953 at Panmunjom, an agreement was reached on terms for an armistice. War casualties were enormous.
Behind the scenes, just figures coming out, but actually 1.3 million, just more. 1.3 million Korean casualties, both civilian soldiers. 1.5 million North Korean casualties.
The modest estimates cite
Here. Almost similar figures. South Korea 1.3, North Korea 1.5.
1.3 million South Korean civilian and military casualties. The number for North Korea is 1.5 million out of a population.
This is a very big figure, okay? Japanese soldiers dead 3 million, so it's a very big figure. It's only, how many years? 2, 3 years? And they're going to the back and forth, right? North and South.
1/3 the size of the South. And a total of 33,625 Americans.
33,000. Oh, this is almost 36,000 American soldiers. And 10,000 North Koreans. In China, South, 10,000 of North Korean soldiers. 10,000 North Korean.
Americans, hundreds of thousands of Chinese and Korean,
Hundreds of thousands of Chinese.
North and South soldiers, and millions of civilians died in this brutal police action.
I forget that the Vietnam soldiers, American soldiers, dead not more than 36,000, I think. I don't remember, but Korean War is so many people dead.
Author and CUK President Chung Soon-Kim has written about the heartbreaking separation of families caused by the war.
Although the literature on Korean War is relatively rich, accounts of the suffering of civilians, particularly those separated from their family members, have been scarce. To fill the vacuum, I wrote narratives of those who suffered from the tragedy of family dispersal during the war in my book called Faithful Endurance. This book supplemented an existing literature that tend to focus on politics, warfare, and weaponry.
Korean family dispersal stemming from the partition of
I didn't use dictionary every word because this is narrative is not correctly translated. Like for example, embellish, no dictionary. A different word, but I don't understand.
Of the peninsula along the 38th parallel has been a most devastating long-term outcome of the Korean War. Although a ceasefire went into effect more than a half-century ago, the splitting and splintering of families persists to this day. Once, it was estimated that 10 million Koreans, 5 million from each side, were separated from their family members. Today, South Korean authorities estimate the figure to be between 750,000 and 1.23 million first-generation displaced family members. The physical displacement of such a large number of people was painful for the nation, but adding to that pain was the fact that family members who were divided across the North and the South found it virtually impossible to communicate for more than half a century. Despite the fact that millions of Koreans have suffered from this extended diaspora, their misery was poorly publicized until the summer of 1983, when KBS television station aired its reunion telethon. The telethon came about almost by accident.
On June 30, 1980.
I showed you last week North Korean video, just talking about kind of split family, and South Korean some sort of security organization very keen to investigate South and North Korean people's missing people, right? Last week I showed you.
While I was conducting an anthropological fieldwork on the subject, KBS broadcast a television special on families separated during the war. Originally, it had been scheduled to air for only 95 minutes. The program was so successful that KBS found it difficult to end it at the scheduled time. Thousands and thousands of people rushed to the studio to register for an appearance on camera. In the end, the program lasted 4.5 months, from June 30 to November 14, 1983, claiming 450 hours of air time and reuniting.
Oh, it means more than 10,000 people find out their family because of this South Korean broadcasting. And they went to North Korea to take a picture for the North Korean people looking for the family, right?
More than 10,000 persons with lost family members.
Following the telethon, the 39th North-South Dialogue produced the first North-South exchange of hometown visitors and our troops. Originally, negotiations between North and South
Also, they Korean people abduction they have, actually, like Japanese people, right?
South Korea for the repatriation of civilians kidnapped by the North during the war had begun under the auspices of the United Nations on July 10, 1951. It later resumed in 1953. The negotiations continued through the 1960s, 1970s, 80s, and 90s. At last, on 20th September 1985, some 151 visitors, headed by their respective Red Cross presidents, arrived in Seoul and Pyongyang by way of Panmunjom, the site of a former village near the north-south border, for a 4-day visit. Excluding the art troupe, people from each Korea were chosen for reunions with family members, close relatives, and friends. When Kim Dae-jung became president of South Korea in February 1998, he implemented a policy of détente, and later, on his visit to North Korea in June 2000, he facilitated an exchange of visits for dispersed families. 100 people from each Korea will make visits to Seoul and Pyongyang to reunite with family members separated for more than half a century. Since then, there have been numerous exchanges involving a total of 9,977 persons from both sides. Unfortunately, since the number is limited to 100 persons per side for each reunion, it will take a very long time for all those separated to be reunited. It must be said that South Korea has made an unceasing effort to accommodate the reunion of separated families. In recent time, in response to South Korea's tenacious effort, both Koreas agreed to have a reunion meeting for 5 days from February 20th to 25th.
Oh, so they are doing now, 2014.
2014 at Kumgangsan, a scenic mountain in North Korea. At that meeting, 170 families with 813 members from both Koreas participated. It was the 19th reunion September 1985, but over 3 years, there have been no reunion meetings until in October 2010. Since then, there have been another reunion in October 2015 as the latest one. Such a prolonged
Oh my God, 50 years.
interval between such reunions becomes distressful to the separated family members, knowing that many surviving members die as time goes by. In fact, only 72,000
Of course, 1950, right? 65 years ago. So almost already dead.
882 of the 128,842 remained alive as of July 31st, 2013, meaning that some 2,000 have died each year.
2,000 have died each year. The same as Comfort Women, huh?
Of the survivors,
yesterday I took dinner with former NEC top person, and he told me, Clyde, you wait another couple of years, every Comfort Woman will dead. I told him it doesn't matter even if they're dead, but they are ancestors, son and daughters, grandson, granddaughter still talking to us.
9.3% were over 90 years old.
Oh, yeah, this is, yeah, right. 1950, so 65 years later. 65 years means 8 years old at that time, 15 years, right? Exactly.
Old, 40.5% were in their 80s, 30.6% in their 70s, and 11.4% in their 60s. Time is growing short for the aging Koreans who long for their loved ones. Even after the Korean War ended, democracy was a long time in coming to South Korea. After Lee Seung-man became president, he exerted complete control over Korean politics. Because his presidency was a long one,
Lee is Seung-yeon Lee. Seung-yeon Lee is Lee Shoban. Is dictatorship, military dictatorship.
Lee's autocratic ideas had time to take root and grow stronger. By 1954, employing various immoral, unethical, and illegal tactics, Lee's Liberal Party had achieved a clear majority in the Assembly. In order to amend the Constitution,
How do you pronounce that? Seung-man Lee? Seung-yeon. I had Seung-yeon Lee. Seung-man Lee. Seung-man Lee. Not Seung-yeon. Seung-man Lee.
and make himself president for life, Lee and his party employed every available means to bribe, banish, or threaten independence in the Assembly. The 1960 election was marred by fraud so blatant that it could not be ignored. In March and April 1960, students demonstrated all over the country, including Seoul and other cities. In March and April,
oh, this is very famous strike. Korean 경무대, 고슈지겐, 경무대, 고슈지겐.
April 1960, some 300,000 university and high school students marched towards the presidential mansion, where they were fired upon.
I didn't say that. I didn't like the name of this here.
By police.
Guess not. 고슈.4月革命.
D 賞だ。
なんとかってね、ちょっと待ってね。 光무달 무달 별로違うかな 違うな 지용 무달 지용 これか 지가 지용 무달 Please. Oh, here comes. Here. Ah, 전무달 세가달.
Oh.
아, 세가달. 세가달의こと言うんだ. 전무달. 아, 프레지던스 팔레스ね. 아, 4月革命だ. あんまり知られないっていうの、そうmuch famous ね.
Marched towards the presidential mansion, where they were fired upon by police. About 130 students were killed and 1,000 wounded. The occurrence is now known as the April 19th Student Revolution.
Ah, they said April 19th revolution. She said.
Despite the bloodshed, the march was not in vain. Because of the demonstration,
Okay, right?
Yi finally resigned on April 26th, and the First Republic came to an end. The collapse of Yi's government was followed by a brief interim administration, and the constitutional government was changed to a bicameral.
How to pronounce this following the president? 준심제. I can't remember that. 준심제. Oh God. Huh? Okay. Not his name. What? He is not president. Oh, this one. It's problem. They don't write it down in Japanese, so I can't recognize who he is. Park Chung-hee is father of the past president, right? This is famous. Oh, those every that don't know those names. Syngman Lee is famous, right? And also Park Chung-hee is famous because he did for the miracle of Hangang, right? And following president or several presidents. Oh, Chun Do-hwan is famous, right? Roh Tae-woo is famous. Kim Yeon-sam, Kim Dae-jung, Roh Moo-hyun, yes. Goku, no, I don't know. Remember famous. Goku, very short person, short period. Okay, this is, we don't need to know his name. Okay.
Parliament consisting of a lower and upper house. Yoon Bo-san assumed the figurehead position of president, and Chang Myeon took on the role of prime minister to lead the new government. However, the task proved too daunting for a weak government to handle. The short-lived Second Republic lasted from August 15, 1960 to
Korea is also many times military coup. Huh? All the way, past 40 years, military occupied this government.
May 16, 1961, when a military junta led by Major General Park Chung-hee seized power. Using social and political unrest,
Park Chung-hee. This one? No picture. How come they're spelling different, right? It's interesting. Oh, this is right character, but this is oral translated. It's spelling different, right? Yeah.
Rest as a pretext, 43-year-old Park Chung-hee took power in a coup on May 16, 1961. Park suspended the constitution, formed a military junta to impose an absolute military dictatorship, and created the Supreme Council for National Reconstruction. Park emerged as its chairman and ruled the country until 1963.
Park Chung-hee. What? Wait a minute. This is Park Chung-hee. Oh, she's talking Park Chung-hee, right? Father of. Oh, okay, father of. Park Chung-hee.
With presidential elections scheduled for mid-October of that year, Park retired from the army, ran as the presidential candidate of the Democratic Republican Party, and defeated Yoon Bo-san, former president of the Second Republic, and became president of the Third Republic. In 1967, Park won re-election and 2 years later secured a constitutional amendment to open the way for a third term. He was elected again in 19...
Oh, he elected 3 times. Oh, he declared martial law. At that time,
in an attempt to ensure his
not stable.
unchallenged command of Korean affairs, Park declared martial law on October 17, 1972, and called for a program
restoration by advocating Meiji restoration.
Of revitalizing reform Yushin modeled
Maybe here at Japan, right?
on the Japanese Meiji Restoration of late 1868. The Yushin Constitution was approved by an intimidated populace through a public referendum in November 1972, and this effectively transformed the presidency into a legal dictatorship. Under the terms of the new constitution, the president was to be chosen indirectly by members of the National Council for Unification, which was headed by the president himself.
Anytime good dictatorship can reorganize their country regime and system, legislation. Actually, he did, huh? So maybe Abe tried to do that, right?
Park's 18-year rule saw
Oh, he 18 years. But actually decline of democracy in Korea, but he made drastic change in Korean system, right?
the degradation of the movement for Korean democracy, but his government revolutionized Korean economic growth and industrialization, employing effective economic development plans with the help of a new and studious apolitical group of technocrats and an educated discipline.
This one almost revolutionary.
And dedicated workforce.
He changed the country.
In contrast with Lee Sung-man,
Oh, he has a strong anti-Japanese sentiment. Oh, I remember he was a military officer before World War II, Japanese military officer. Oh, no. This is former president, but he is achieved the normalization of diplomatic relation with Japan. Anti-Japanese sentiment has the former people.
who maintained strong anti-Japanese sentiments. Park normalized diplomatic relations with Japan by signing a bilateral pact in 1965. Facing vehement opposition, especially from student groups who were against such a normalization agreement, Park tried to persuade the public
Of course, lots of people against Japan, but he supports Japanese normalization relationship. That's the reason why he is killed?
that any compensation resulting from the normalization agreement with Japan could be used as seed money for Korean economic development and industrialization. Whatever his ambition, schools, and accomplishments, Park's rule was brought to an abrupt end on October 26, 1979, when he was assassinated.
Okay, assassinated. CIA, Korean CIA, okay.
Fascinated by his close aide and confidant Kim Jae-gu, director of Park's own Korean Central Intelligence Agency. The period of transition immediately after Park's assassination was characterized by uncertainty, confusion, and contention. Under the 1972 Constitution, the Prime Minister Choi Kyu-ha became acting president and was supposed to serve out the remainder of Park's term. However, a new military force emerged.
Oh, I don't understand this Korean name. Just a moment. Oh, not famous. Until Roh Tae-woo. Until Roh Tae-woo, 1988. So she did 1979, right? So for 10 years, not so much famous. Okay.
Emerged and staged yet another coup on December 12, 1979 to fill the power vacuum in the aftermath of Park's death. The new military group was led by Major...
Oh, this guy is famous. John Du-fan. John Du-fan. Oh? Where?
11 and 12.
Ah, this is famous. John Du-fan. Sorry. John Do-han. Oh, this picture I remember, but that one is I am not so much familiar with get all the picture right.
General Chun Do-han, head of the Defense Security Command, the agency responsible for investigating Park's murder.
It's difficult because Korean plays in so many people, right? So I can't memorize which one which.
He was promoted to 3-star and soon after 4-star general within a year and retired from the military in 1980 to devote himself to politics. In late August, Chun was named president by indirect elections in accordance with the Yuan Constitution and was inaugurated into office on September 1st, 1980. Despite demonstrations, commotion, and social unrest, Chun adopted a new constitution that established indirect election of the president, who would serve a single 7-year term. By doing so, Chun was able to assume the presidency in early 1981. After Chun's inauguration in January as president of the Fifth Republic, U.S. President Ronald Reagan invited Chun to be his first official foreign guest. Reagan's invitation was a reversal of the approach that had been taken earlier by his predecessor, Jimmy Carter. As part of his campaign platform,
this time I think American government and the China government, they decided to establish relationship. 1986, I believe, right? Do you remember?
Yes.
Oh my God. What happened? This one, right? 1986. US-China trade, 1986. United States, yeah, after 30 years absence. Right? Not the 86. China-US relationship. Say don't tell this one. I just look for a long one. Around that anyway. What is this?
From in 1976, Jimmy Carter had promised to withdraw U.S. troops from Korea.
Oh, really? Withdraw troops from Korea? He said. Actually, they didn't.
However, then President Park Chung-hee did not like this idea, and U.S.-Korea relations had cooled. So Reagan was hoping to improve relations with Korea. According to Steinberg, President Reagan's invitation to President Chun actually saved the life of Kim Dae-jung, who was under a death sentence.
Kim Dae-jung received death sentence. I don't understand this Korean word, but something uprising.
Were allegedly inciting the riots that led to the Gwangju incident, a democratic uprising named for the city where it occurred. You may recall from earlier discussion that
always Korean history is for Japanese people very difficult to recognize the name and the location name, and very difficult to memorize because we don't know what it is.
Kim Dae-jung went on to become president of South Korea in 1998. Reagan's invitation to
Okay, just a little bit. I'm going to toilet. Okay. Jot. This sentence I don't understand this Korean means.
To Chun might have been interpreted as a U.S. endorsement of the legitimacy of the Chun government. However, from that time on,
What at that time anti-American sentiment they had in Korea?
onward, anti-U.S. sentiment began to rise among Korean youth. Demonstrations by students and labor unions became frequent. In 1985, for instance, there were 3,877 on-campus demonstrations. As mass approach
I think this is very similar to Japanese demonstration around those days against America because of military located in Korea, so they tried to against them.
protests against the Chun government escalated in June 1987. The government was forced to accept the people's demands to enact a set of democratic measures on June 29th. The constitution was revised again, reintroducing direct popular election for the president with a single 5-year term.
Oh, okay. So they get into democracy. I see.
At the ruling Democratic Justice Party convention on June 10, 1987,
Right.
John designated Roh Tae-woo, a former general who had played a central role in the success of Chun's coup, as the party's candidate for president. As the party's candidate for president, Roh announced a
Okay, just try to check the name of the president. Chun Do-han and Roh Tae-woo. Then Kim Yong-sun. Okay, this one, right? From him to Chun Do-han is military regime and switching to democratic regime. Oh.
a sweeping liberalization program, maintaining a cautious distance between himself and the increasingly unpopular Chun. Roh won the presidential decision, and his government was able to institute some positive foreign policies towards a communist bloc, including
Oh, sorry.
was able to institute some positive foreign policies towards a communist bloc, including establishing diplomatic ties with Eastern European countries, the Soviet Union, and China. Also, Roh was credited
Exalted. Sorry, exalted. What does it mean, exalted? Oh, okay. This one. Cautiously exalted diplomatic initiative to North Korea.
credited with diplomatic initiatives that enabled both North and South Korea to join the United Nations simultaneously. Roh's administration allowed for rapid liberalization on the labor front, but furious labor strikes and student demonstrations were still prevalent. He had limited his term to 5 years as specified in the Constitution. As Roh's government came to an end, so did military rule. Finally, a civilian government was restored when one of the opposition leaders, Kim Yong-sang, became president in 1993. Kim's government had the distinction of eradicating corruption in the bureaucracy by legislating a property registration system for public officials and the practice of using real names in financial transactions. He also restored autonomous local governance, which had been suspended since
What? Why he's reconducted the municipality? What does this mean?
elections. He also restored autonomous local governance, which had been suspended
Okay, not municipality, local governance.
since the May 16, 1961 military.
Local governance because, they just, beforehand, they have military regime. So she is just a democratic organization.
coup. Despite all these moves, Kim's government suffered severely, and the country faced financial exigencies when the foreign currency crisis swept across Asia from 1977 to 1998. Kim's government failed to
I make bailout. When? 1999? 8? 9? Asian crisis? Asian crisis 1989? Yes, I think Asian crisis. Right?
1997.
7. 97. Okay. 97. So Korea request IMF bailout.
the national financial system and eventually asked the International Monetary Fund for a bailout loan. Nevertheless, after his 1993 election, when Kim Il-sung became the country's first civilian president after 3 decades of military rule, Korean political power was peacefully transferred according to the people's choice. Perhaps the single most significant accomplishment of all presidents after Roh Tae-woo will be the peaceful transfer of power to the succeeding president, regardless of party affiliation. To pass presidential power across party lines, similar to the party oscillations that often occur with successive American presidents, is a remarkable accomplishment for Koreans who fought for this right for 7 decades. Throughout their history, Koreans have been good students in adopting foreign ideas, ideologies, religions, and philosophies, such as Confucianism, Taoism, Christianity, Buddhism, democracy, communism, capitalism, and others. Korea started experimenting with democracy when it became an independent country following its liberation from Japanese rule. Koreans tried to understand the full meaning of democracy decades ago. And this is evident in Korea's republican governments. Korea instituted its first republican government after World War II. The Constitution of 1948 was based on the principle of democracy. Korea then experienced the strong authoritarian rule of Lee Seung-man for 12 years, and then military rule for 32 years thereafter. Finally, as of 1993, Koreans now enjoy a genuinely democratic society.
Formally 1993
After they
down
first
to
encountered
democracy,
the
right?
idea of democracy, it took nearly 7 decades for Koreans to adapt to the democratic principle in both word and deed. This time, we learned about the long road to democracy. Did you follow the many turns and setbacks on this journey? This video lecture will be continued for those of you who love Korea and Korean culture as much as native Koreans do. See you next time.
Okay, this is a Korean political history. Okay. Its most concern is always we are struggling to the president name and the location name. Not easy to memorize. But how can I say, newspapers and TV and recently they're using the Korean name, right? Moon Jae-in, right? I don't know. I don't watch TV and I don't read Japanese newspaper. Still they're using Japanese name?
I don't know.
Okay, this is a very current Japanese problem. This is a Korean name. We try to remember this one. And then, okay, this is history of after World War II. Then I'd like to talk about sunshine on Moon Jae-in's strategy. He tried to do well with North Korea, and a couple weeks ago he decided to prepare some money, $700 million for North Korea. But finally he didn't do that. Stop that amount of money. And so he still consider for sunshine strategy. Sunshine strategy is doing well or friendly relationship with Korea, North Korea. This is so-called sunshine. He's the same person, same approach as Notel before. This video is brief explanation.
Sunshine Cruise.
And this video is front 1/3 is explanation of his Moon Jae-in, and the later part is discussion.
Jae-in is promising a new approach at home and on the world stage, but is he up to the challenge? This is Inside Story.
Inside Story is very good, news video. I like it.
Hello, welcome to the program in Doha. I'm Adrian Finnegan. It's the return of liberalism in South Korea. The election of President Moon Jae-in marks a major shift in the country's political landscape. Conservatives have been in charge for nearly a decade, but after the last 6 months, which ended with the previous president impeached and facing jail...
Oh, okay, this one is this year's May.
It's not surprising that South Koreans want change. The question is, what will change look like? Moon's policies could lead to dialogue with North Korea, a
dialogue with North Korea,
long-time adversary, and could harm relations with the US, a long-time ally. We'll get to our guests in just a moment, but first, Rob McBride reports from Seoul.
Sworn in as the 19th president of South Korea, Moon Jae-in spoke of the burden now placed on his shoulders by his election after the impeachment of his predecessor. But he praised the spirit of the Korean people in overcoming the political turmoil of the previous months. He also said he would do anything to avoid conflict with North Korea.
안보 위기도 서둘러 해결하겠습니다.
If needed, I will fly to Washington right away. I will visit Beijing and Tokyo, and if it becomes possible, I will also go to Pyongyang. I will do everything I can to firmly establish peace on the Korean peninsula.
By the way, he is very strong supporter for comfort women and laborers, workers before World War II. So,
US is concerned he will take a softer line with North Korea as it takes a hardline approach. Moon has promised to review the installation of the US THAAD missile defense system in
this is again, he just called problem, right?
South Korea, which he has criticized. The deployment soured relations with China, which has punished South Korea economically.
So he just swaying to China or to United States and threat from North Korea.
First on the agenda is economics, because without that, the relationship is meaningless, because at this point, South Korea is really hurting.
President Moon, a former Special Forces soldier, has, however, also promised to maintain strong military ties with the US.
He wants to engage both China and United
Okay, China and US.
States to find non-military solution to North Korean nuclear weapons program. On the other hand, he doesn't want to look too dovish, so he's been actually playing up a lot of his military credentials.
And he is pledged to be a different kind of president, saying the office has become too powerful. To help fulfill that promise, President Moon says he wants to change his place of work. Traditionally, presidents occupy the official residence, the Blue House, beyond those gates. But according to Moon, that makes the president too remote. He wants to turn that into a public space, while he moves his office to this far more modest government building. In that new office, he will find a stacked in-tray. Now in charge of a country that has effectively been without presidential leadership for half a year. Rob McBride, Al Jazeera, Seoul.
He said the Blue House is Segadai.
All right, let's bring in our guests for today from Busan in South Korea. Robert Kelly, Professor of Political Science and Diplomacy. From Hong Kong, Hwang Jung-wook, a law professor at Hankook University of Foreign Affairs. And from Beijing, Einar Tangen, whom we saw in our report just a moment ago, political affairs analyst and specialist on China. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. I want to get on to the domestic challenges that President Moon faces in just a few moments, but let's begin with South Korea's relations with its allies. Professor Kelly, Robert, is President Moon on a collision course with the Trump administration over the South's future relations with the North?
I think there is at the very top. I think that President Moon and President Trump are very different people, both in terms of character and
He said very different people, both people. Moon and Trump. They cannot make much each other. Character, ideology.
Pretty buttoned up, serious policy.
Bottom up. This is not bottom up. Bottom up. Okay.
Wonk sort of guy. He's a known quantity with policy positions that go back a long time. Donald Trump is almost the exact opposite, right? He's sort of flamboyant, erratic. Prone to wild policy swings. I think Moon will probably find him a bit crude, to be perfectly honest. I would imagine I actually think that they'll probably really dislike one another.
Dislike each other.
However, there are pretty deep bureaucratic roots. The South Korean and American alliance. It's been around for a long time. The militaries, the State Department and the Foreign Ministry, they interact a lot. There's a sort of whole world of think tanks that tie the two of them together. So I don't think it will lead to some kind of a major crisis, but I do think at the very top there will be a very deep disagreement. The Trump administration's impulse is hawkishness, whereas the Moon people, President Moon today said in his inaugural address he'd like to go to Pyongyang. So that sets up a pretty major ideological split.
Hwang Jung-wook, Professor, do you agree with that? Are President Trump and President Moon's views on how to deal with the North completely opposing points of view? Is Mr. Moon's desire simply to get Pyongyang back to the negotiating table, where, as the US wanted something entirely highly different.
Actually, Moon Jae-in is against Trump's opinion, right? But Trump is a very strong man. So Moon Jae-in stopped to building a negotiation relationship line to North Korea.
Yeah, at the same time, I think Mr. Moon, President Moon now actually has commented in the past that he actually agrees with President Trump on a couple of points. One, that strategic patience in the past administrations have turned out to be a failure. But I think the key difference between President Trump and President Moon is going to be whether the military option is going to be a serious option going forward. I think, along with President Moon, virtually every South Korean will agree that no one wants a second Korean War.
海野Tangin, we all remember the Sunshine Policy, the South Sunshine Policy towards the North. Are we going to see under President Moon, do you think, a Sunshine Mark II policy?
Well, it's quite possible. If you start looking at his PM and his new spy master, both of them were part of that effort that was up till 2008. And it's quite possible that he's gearing up. His spy master has already said that he's willing to go to Pyongyang, and Moon himself has said under the right conditions, he would also be willing to do so.
So what would the right conditions be?
Well, I think that's left amorphously. I think we haven't really defined what those conditions are. The U.S. has been insisting that Pyongyang put away its nuclear weapons as a precondition to any kind of talks. I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the precondition for North Korea, but it'll be interesting to see what he believes is, quote, the right conditions.
Robert Kelly, how far do you think President Moon is willing to push back against the U.S.? Is there political capital to be won in South Korea in him doing so? Is the U.S. likely to see a critical ally breaking ranks?
Right. I don't think he'll go that far. I think he's constrained by the fact that he's a minoritarian president. He only won 41% of the vote. It's true that there was a far left party that won 67% as well. So he's roughly, if you sort of...
Is the U.S. likely to see a critical ally breaking ranks?
Right. I don't think he'll go that far. I think he's constrained by the fact that he's a minoritarian president. He only won 41% of the vote. It's true that there was a far left party that won 67% as well. So he's roughly, if you sort of throw in those voters, he's around 47, 48%. That's what he got in 2012 when he lost. Moon's coalition just isn't that large, and I don't think that he has the political space at home to run off and do something really outrageous. They just like go to Pyongyang unless there's some kind of major concession. I also do think that he will run into a wall of American bureaucratic resistance. It's not 1997, 98 when the Sunshine Policy was tried for the first time. I think there's a much greater consensus on the American side that North Korea is a real, genuine global menace now. Nuclearization, missilization, the criminality continues. They just used VX of WMD in an airport a couple months ago. I don't think that Moon has the space for it. He just doesn't have a mandate for that kind of adventurism. He could do it, but he'll face crushing criticism in the conservative president. That I can say for sure. And the Americans, especially under Donald Trump, will be very, very hostile. He could do it, but he'll provoke a crisis if he does. I think.
Professor Huang, what do you make of that? Is President Moon at the very least likely to order the removal of that recently implemented missile defense system, which was it came into force just days before he was elected?
Well, actually, President Moon has never been, adamantly against that one way or the other. I think what he has supported is a policy of, actually strategic patience in some sense. Basically, he wanted to be kind of ambiguous about that, using it as a card against China and North Korea at the same time. So he wanted to have a policy space within which he can move around, which the previous administration tried to take away. So I'm not really sure what's going to go on with that. In fact, what China has done is China has been imposing economic sanctions against South Korean companies for placement of that, and actually that has created a backlash within South Korea. In fact, one policy option that South Korea could look into is to actually purchase additional units of THAAD for its own defenses. Right now, THAAD is being placed in defense of the U.S. military personnel in Korea, but South Korea could actually purchase on its own additional units. I guess one thing I would point out about the potential sunshine policy number 2 is that I agree with Professor Kelly that we are not likely to see a sunshine policy number 2 anytime soon. But at the same time, I think Mr. Moon, as well as his advisors and supporters, kind of view reunification as something that we should all aspire to in the long run. And basically, I guess most South Koreans don't view reunification by military means as a desirable goal. And that actually basically leaves some kind of economic integration, maybe in the model of the European Union going forward between the two Koreas. But that is going to be a long-term project.
Professor Kelly, do you want to come back on that?
Sure. I think that some kind of federation between North and South Korea, that's sort of been thrown around for a while. I think that's sort of the left's answer to the right's insistence on strict unification under Southern terms. The problem with that, I think, is that North Korea probably wouldn't really shift its political system very much, which would make a federation effectively South Korea subsidizing a dictatorship. This is why the Kaesong Industrial Zone was closed a couple of years ago, because what had originally been an effort to sort of integrate the two Koreas economically, get them interacting, actually became a little enclave economy that was effectively subsidizing North Korea to the tune of $100 million a year in cash, U.S. cash, I might add, right? Any kind of federation is going to run exactly into that same kind of crushing moral criticism, not only in the South Korean conservative press, which is dead opposed to this kind of stuff, but also in the United States, which thinks that the Sunshine Policy may have been a noble experiment and was tried, but by the end of it was an error, that it effectively had become patronizing North Korea. This is the hill that Moon has to enclave economy that was effectively subsidizing North Korea to the tune of $100 million a year in cash, U.S. cash, I might add, right? Any kind of federation is going to run exactly into the same that same kind of crushing moral criticism, not only in the South Korean conservative press, which is dead opposed to this kind of stuff, but also in the United States, which thinks that the Sunshine Policy may have been a noble experiment and was tried, but by the end of it was an error, that it effectively had become patronizing North Korea. This is the hill that Moon has to climb. His impulse has made me to do this, but almost all of South Korea's democratic partners, the United States, Japan, external allies, the Europeans, are not comfortable with this, and that's just a high wall to climb.
Anna Tangen, how would China view the reopening of that Kaesong Industrial Park in the demilitarized zone, having implemented the limited sanctions of its own against the North? What would China's view be?
Well, it's an interesting supposition. The fact is that Pyongyang and Beijing are at historic lows in terms of trust. There's been open criticism going back and forth between different media groups. It's clear that there is a lack of trust coming from Pyongyang towards Beijing. They have hinted or said explicitly that they believe that China is following the U.S. So I don't know that the ground is right for that. But with all of this talk about what could happen, things like that, the question is, what are the alternatives and what are the issues? And quite frankly, the issue is young Kim's desire to survive in his own way, in charge of his country. And the issue from the other side is nuclear arms. So there is a possibility that China could come step in and say, we will guarantee the North Korean current government, as long as there's a path towards reunification, as long as South Korea agrees. This is one possible way in which it could bypass the U.S. Because at this point, it is impossible, and I agree with all of my colleagues, that the U.S. will back off at any time over this issue.
I'd read somewhere, Anna, that China is basically happy to preserve the status quo at the moment, to keep the North's nuclear program just where it is at the moment, to freeze it and allow the US to do the heavy lifting in terms of negotiations that would most likely take years. What do you make of that?
I think that's a lot of nonsense, quite frankly. I mean, it is not in China's interest to have any kind of nuclear program alive and kicking. Quite frankly, it would stir up a nuclear arms race throughout Asia, Southeast Asia. As the only nuclear power, China is certainly not, has no appetite to see others gaining the same things. So I really don't know where this kind of thinking comes from. I think it's a bit absurd. It's like saying the U.S. would favor nuclear Cuba. I mean, it's not a pre-nuclear Cuba. This is not the kind of calculation that any kind of sane government makes. And as we all know, China may be a little difficult in terms of strategy, but it is very long on planning.
Robert Kelly, just briefly, I saw you grinning there when I asked that question.
Yeah, sure. I'm trying to imagine the Americans.
I think China is not favor of the owning nuclear arms by North Korea, right? But what he's going to do, China is going to do against North Korea, but I don't know.
What he said is, as long as the North Korea will intend to lift nuclear program, then they will support the North Korea, not South Korea, to unify the Korean Peninsula.
But actually, this is not realistic, right?
Fighting alone to get the North Korean to denuclearize, man.
His message is very difficult to understand.
And that's just never going to happen. If anybody's going to get this to happen, it's going to be the Chinese, because they're the only ones with any kind of indoor into Pyongyang. And even that indoor is pretty narrow, right? I don't think anybody really believes the Chinese have a lot of political leverage. I mean, the real issue is the economic leverage that China has, which is fairly oblique. It's like, cutting off luxury good trade, which they're supposed to do anyway because it's sanctioned. Cutting off fuel oil, which has been rumored in the last couple of weeks. That's the kind of stuff. Those are the kinds of cards that China can play. The United States is sort of getting close to the point where it's either airstrikes or learning to live with North Korea with nuclear weapons. I would say only that the United States has learned to live with Russian and for that Soviet nuclear weapons with the ability to strike continental United States. And China also, we, the Americans, have lived with nuclear deterrence for a long time. It seems possible to me that we could learn to live with North Korea having that capability too, but I find it highly unlikely that North Korea will voluntarily denuclearize. They simply will not get the credibility assurance, like the credible assurances they want in order to give them up. I mean, it makes sense to keep them.
Okay, I want to move on to domestic issues in just a moment, but first, very briefly, Professor Huang, to what extent is President Moon's presidency, his time in office, going to be all about navigating between China and the US?
Well, basically, he has an impossible task. I mean, as other panelists have discussed, we have powerful players with different interests, and North Korea really firmly refusing to budge on the nuclear issue. I think in North Korea's leadership, they're looking at basically Libya's example, where Libya's Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program and basically ended up being abandoned by the Western powers. And I think that's the lesson that North Korea has learned, and it's not likely to give up its nuclear weapons anytime soon.
All right, we've been talking a lot about how Moon's victory will affect South Korea's foreign affairs, but he's also got a lot to tackle domestically. He has to stabilize South Korea after 6 months of political turmoil. As we reported earlier, the previous president, Park Geun-hye, was impeached following a corruption scandal and mass protests. The saga also raised questions about the power of the chaebols. Now, they are massive family-run businesses that are known to influencing politics in South Korea. Moon's under pressure to end that relationship, and he also needs to address the stagnant economy. The chaebols are so powerful that small and middle-sized businesses struggle to grow. 1 in 10 young people is unemployed. Aina Tangat, as far as corruption and reforming the economy are concerned, is President Moon going to be able to achieve everything that he's promised with so many powerful, interested parties who won't take kindly to his plans? Can he do it?
as my colleague in Korea pointed out, he is not a strong actor. He will not have a majority of the parliament, their governing body backing him on his very, very ambitious goals. He's talked about 810,000 new jobs. He's talked about an $8 billion stimulus plan. It's all right now is in the clouds because he has to be able to deliver a government that can actually govern. So there is grave reasons for South Korea to be very, very concerned. They dropped from 3.3% growth in 2015 to 2.8 in 2016, and they're scheduled for 2.6. They have a declining population, high unemployment among the youth. As you pointed out, very stagnant economy. He has to get things going, but he's going to have to find some sort of middle ground. And unfortunately, the Chaebols control so much of this. It will take literally something like a Glass-Steagall Act to separate them into their different components and prevent them from strangling the very economy that they're supposed to be helping.
Robert Kelly, what do you make of that? I mean, to a certain extent, you were saying that he might be a minority president with 41% of the vote, but it was the economy, jobs, and anti-corruption policies that South Koreans voted for, wasn't it? That was why they wanted him as president.
Of course, China put sanctions for Korea, and Samsung cannot operate, like Hyundai cannot sell any cars in China, and also Chinese people, tourists, they do not go to Seoul, so they have big turmoil now. Of course, economic growth is staggering. Okay.
Voted for, wasn't it? That was why they wanted him as president.
Sure. First, let me say that I think both of what the two of you said before me was absolutely correct. The table is sort of this stultifying force, and yeah, the oligopoly or de-oligopolization, antitrust. These are really big issues that have been hanging around for a long time, and at some point somebody's got to deal with this. The table has just become too large. I do think there is a window of opportunity on this, though. In the past, the left has tried to reform the table, and it hasn't really worked because there's a lot of public sympathy. There's a sort of strong perception in South Korea that the table are responsible for the economic miracle of the 60s and 70s, and they sort of managed to play on those public sympathies and push back against government efforts to clean them up. This time, though, they have gotten in a lot of trouble because they got sucked into this scandal that pulled down Park and Hae, right? The Chaegate. They've actually, the head of Samsung is now in prison, which is actually, sort of fairly remarkable given Samsung sort of, clout here, its sort of status as national champion. So I think that's what Moon has to capitalize on. He's got to sort of run with this idea. With the public perception right now that the table are fairly corrupted by what happened before, and he's got to push for, as the other speakers have said, a greater division between the state and the table, right? I mean, the biggest reason why the table can do these things is because they're so large and they're so infected, they're so slid into politics, their tentacles are so much into politics that they sort of throw around a lot of money, and this gets them off the hook regulatorily, right? This gets them, sort of political favors, soft credit from the banks and things like that. The only way to sort of roll that stuff back is to really draw a line, a much thicker wall between the state and business. That's why I think it's so difficult to do this, because, state intervention in the economy is sort of at the heart of the Korean economic model. So this isn't just him saying, the table has to behave better and clean up the balance sheet. This is actually, I would argue, this is something along the lines of a social revolution. This is getting South Koreans to think differently about economic development, and that's going to be hard.
Hwang Chung-wook, do you agree with that? Do you disagree?
Well, actually, I would like to divide up the two issues a little bit. One is the chaebol reform, and the other is economic stimulus. On the chaebol reform, I mean, these are the really powerful interest groups in Korea, and I don't think anybody really thinks that the reforms will take place within 2 or 3 years. I mean, if you think back to the U.S. history during the progressive era, Standard Oil wasn't broken up until 1911 after a long years of Supreme Court fight. And even though President Moon might not have a lot of political capital in terms of votes in the National Assembly, he does control prosecutors, he does control National Tax Service, he does control Korean Fair Trade Commission, which are all very powerful tools against chaebol. So I think it will actually see, long-term reform movement against chaebols to actually free up their market power. On the economic stimulus, I mean, I think this is something that needs to be done immediately. Because of the political turmoil, the Korean economic stagnation has been sort of covered up in the Korean media. But in the late last year, the Korean Statistics Office released a figure saying that the bottom 10% of the Korean population, their income level actually dropped year to year around 16 percentage points. I mean, that is a huge drop for people who are basically living day to day. So I think immediate economic stimulus is very, very much needed, and that's what President Moon is doing. His call for 810,000 jobs, it really does harken back to the New Deal era with the various programs introduced under FDR. And I do hope that within next few months we'll see economic stimulus being put in place, and hopefully President Moon can build a political coalition to actually pull that through.
海野Tangen, have you heard anything there that changes your view? Come back to the question. The president has so much to do. He's promised that he's going to do all this stuff. Can he?
Well, the elephant in the room is obviously China. I mean, for the last 2 months, the number of cars sold, Korean cars sold in China has dropped by more than 50% each month. This is a staggering amount for an economy that 25% of its GDP is dependent upon exports, and 1/3 of those exports involve China. So under this particular things, he has to do something about that. China. So under this particular things, he has to do something about that. If he can negotiate something with China that delays it, I think China will take off the screws, and the embargo, the unofficial embargo, will be lifted, and this will give him some room to maneuver. Without that, it looks very, very dim.
Robert, we're running out of time. One last question for you. We think of South Korea as being a prosperous, modern economy, people generally well off, have a good standard of living. What was President Moon's appeal among ordinary South Koreans? Why did they vote for him?
I would argue that it was it was simply a big backlash against the right. Almost any left-wing candidate would have done well. This is akin to the route of the Republican Party in 1974 and 76 after Watergate. So in that sense, he just benefited from the times. I think Moon is also seen as sort of a fairly upright kind of guy, and if you look at him, sort of straight-laced and buttoned up and sort of very professorial. He has a kind of Obama kind of sheen to him with the sort of seriousness and the glasses and sort of lawyerly way that he speaks. He's also quick. He's also pretty clean, right? And I think the other candidates were all sort of not, they were weak. The guy in the right called himself the Donald Trump of Korea, which sort of everybody's a gimmick. And how unpopular Donald Trump is here, and the centrist who was supposed to be sort of this performance candidate who's going to sort of sweep the race, he really flamed out in the debate, and I think just kind of picked up the pieces.
There we're going to have to end our discussion. Gentlemen, many thanks indeed for being with us. Robert Kelly, Hwang Jung-wook, and海野Tangen. As always, thank you for watching the program. Don't forget you can see Inside Story again at any time just by going to the website. You'll find that at aljazeera.com. Further discussion, join us on Facebook at facebook.com/AJ Insights.
I think that the last guy is I don't understand what he said. Do you understand?
So
Yes.
why
He's talking about.
was the Moon Jae-in voted? Why the people to vote for him?
What? What do you say?
So there is something that the people decided to vote for him, and can he? There was something that he's going to have to show the achievement that on the reason why the people voted for him. Then can he do that?
I see. Okay. I see.
Then people is seeing him as being clean, and they're taking the bottom up approach.
Yeah, he's taking bottom up approach. Yes. That's right. And I think Moon Jae-in and Donald Trump are not going well anyway. So, but Korean people, former president, couple president, they try to develop sunshine approach and consider for reunification, right? And this is, I think, because of the ordinary people in favor to do that. But this is actually impossible idea. But this current Moon Jae-in try to do it again. But my opinion is a very similar idea that Korean taking action, because Kim Jong-un, okay, that he is going to setting up the nuclear bomb. Setting up means completing nuclear bomb. He is going to switching the country's direction from military to focus on more ordinary people's level of life. Otherwise, this government will going to be cannot be sustained in the next 6 months or 3 months, 3 years. Not long time they cannot sustain current situation, and people is very much getting problem for the eating of food, and they can sustain current level of life. So Kim Jong-un he understand that. So he's switching to the focus on military action toward more peaceful action as soon as they certain level of establishment of the military power. So Moon Jae-in talking is that meaning is meaningful to negotiate, because North Korea expect business opportunity and also expect money. But problem is U.S. will agree with Moon Jae-in's opinion. Not this is the other issue. This is the same thing happening in Afghanistan. Ghani president is against Donald Trump. It's because Afghanistan, Trump sending troops and battle against Taliban. But Ghani want to more settle down peaceful approach to getting support from Pakistan, not Taliban. The similar situation in Afghanistan. But South Korea is the same approach is Moon Jae-in is going to take. But nobody thinking about. But he is thinking is I by myself, not now, but next several months later, maybe 6 months later, Kim Jong-un want to get support from South Korea. This is my opinion.
And then the Chinese, maybe one the one Chinese guy out of this, because in this the video was saying that Korea has been getting the sanction from China, where the Korean economy is started to struggle. Then how the Korean can survive this the situation is dependent on the Korean ability to have the negotiation with China. This is maybe the implication from him that South Korea has not been negotiating well with China.
Okay, this is one aspect. Currently, China is obviously put sanction to Korea for eliminating Samsung supermarket in China. Also, Hyundai automobile deleted, and no Chinese people visiting to Seoul, tourists. So, but they said that impact is 0.6% of GDP, some video said, but actually more than that, I believe. But still, Moon Jae-in is struggling to how to dealing with China. And the one solution is North Korea will going to settle down. Nuclear power development, nuclear bomb development, and they try to put money on it. Then switch into more country, more how to stabilize the country. At that time, whenever American recognize, the threat for the strife among North Korea and USA, and the situation turn around, and maybe American will agree with Moon Jae-in's opinion. So I don't know what Moon Jae-in is going to do with United States and China. Not simple solution.
But I think from the Chinese perspective or the Korean, no matter what the Korean wants to do, then maybe the China doesn't care unless the Korean is doing by themselves.
What do you mean? What do you mean doing by themselves?
China wants South Korea to...
Oh, you mean support to North Korea?
Yeah, whatever they would do, then the China wants South Korea to come to China to do anything.
Yeah, that's right. You said you're right. China is actually beforehand. I don't know. I'm not sure why, but I don't know. But beforehand, China never cooperate with South Korea for supporting to North Korea. China, they themselves just supporting North Korea, you know. They export oil and they buy North Korean coal, but not cooperate with South Korea beforehand. So, I don't know why, but maybe in future they're going to cooperate with South Korea doing something, support to North Korea. It's kind of happen. It might be happen, but not in the past.
So how is it things from China to North Korea? And North Korea is still striving to finalize nuclear program, and as they mentioned in the interview, the North Korea never think to give up the nuclear program.
No, never give up.
Yeah, so, but the China, it sounds in the video that China, on the other hand, wants this nuclear program to be lifted. Then, in return, they may be prepared to support the reunification from the North Korea.
But this is reasonable, not reasonable, right? It's impossible, right? But anyway, China and North Korea relationship is very bad because North Korea don't stop developing nuclear bomb. And Kim Jong-un, what he is thinking is he want to get more independent among China, Russia, US. Yes. He didn't compromise, okay? So even if China make a complaint, any kind of opinion against North Korea, but North Korea didn't listen. That's the reason why China North Korea relationship not good. But still, China support North Korea because China needs to sustain North Korea's country itself. Okay? American troops don't want to come to the border of China. So, still China needs to support North Korea for their country. Even they don't like Kim Jong-un. Right? So, okay, this is second video. And third one is I'm going to continue after lunch. And maybe 20-30 minutes I'm coming back. And this one is history of Korea is the guy is American Korean American. He's going to explain Korean history. This is very easy to understand. Very easy to understand. He's American, but Korean. And it's very easy, also very interesting. American people, how does he think about Korean-Japanese relationship? This is talking about before World War II also. So very interesting. American people believe that kind of history of Korea, different from Japanese. Okay, so I'm going to take a lunch and as soon as possible coming back, 20-30 minutes. Okay.
Nice.
So see you later.
I think Rex Tillerson is a dead man walking. I think that, first of all, the ability to be a successful Secretary of State without the full confidence of the President is zero. So James Baker, who was George Bush Sr.'s Secretary of State, Ronald Reagan's Chief of Staff, once said to me, the single most important quality you look for in a successful Secretary of State, it's actually not intellect, not foreign policy experience, it's the trust of the President. Because when you go out and do the work, when you are representing the United States, there's only one question every foreign government has. Are you really speaking for the President? When you tell us something, are you making an assurance that the President will uphold? They understand the structure of government, and the President is kind of bizarre. And so that's what they want to know. But Rex Tillerson has no credibility on that score. Not only is it absolutely clear that Trump doesn't think very highly of him, it's very clear that he doesn't think very highly of Trump. It's clear that he's not a confidant. It's clear that Trump is actively auditioning. He's allowing Nikki Haley to publicly audition virtually every day for the same job.
The right afterward. And their product. That's what normal people do with their family
And for people to somehow act like this is a big controversy for me is just kind of funny.
You're going to defend your family if they're not telling the truth, if they're doing something wrong?
I'm going to defend my family if I think my father's been taken out of context. And I think if people don't understand exactly what my father was saying at the time, yes.
You said the left-wingers and the white nationalists. Left-wingers are the same as white nationalists?
Look, I understand that you're never going to let this go with the president. He came out and directly said the words that you wanted him to say. Okay. No, but what I'm saying is he's talking to his father in this situation, and I think there's some people that there's nothing that Donald Trump's not going to do.
高橋か。
はいはい。
なんで俺んとこなってんのかなと思っておかしい。ちょっと待ってね。あと2分ぐらい待って。今朝ね、3時半に目覚めちゃってさ。3時半に目覚めちゃってさ、やっぱ眠たいよね。今日大変だな。今日東京すごい寒い。
私の金曜日の朝3時ぐらいでしょ。金曜日。朝から3時ぐらいから。
あなた？
その前の日早かったんですよね。早く寝ちゃって。
そうなんじゃ、俺と一緒じゃない。俺3時半に目覚めてさ、もう、それから起きてさ、やることみんなやって、で、たまたま、なんだっけな、メールが全部入ってこなくなっちゃってさ、で、それ、直してさ、2時間ぐらいかかって直して。あと携帯電話がね、割れてたのが新しいの。2000円払ったら新しいのもらえた。2000円で。
2000円ですか
？2000円でね、新しいの取り替えてくれた。これ、はい。これ。ほら。割れてたのに全部綺麗。
それアップルですか？ iPhone ですか？
iPhone。だからこれまた、なんかしないまた終わっちゃう。本当は X 欲しかったんだけどね。X 販売するまで待とうと思ったけども、ソフトが完全に壊れちゃったの。どう壊れたかっていうとね、開きたいとこ押しても違うとこ開いちゃうしね。で、勝手に電話かけちゃう。だからこれまずいと思ってさ、 で、さすがにいくらなんでもね、電話のとこを開くとね、勝手に違うとこかけちゃう。だから、まずいんでね。で、買い替えたの。たら、お金かかるかと思ったら、今までポイントが溜まってて。で、1500円で取り替えてくれた。だから、あなたも朝早かった。俺も朝早かった。やっぱり、しんどいよね。今日午後辛いな。今日、雨だったら住みは来るったけど、今日晴れたから。今日17度だ、17度。
すごいですね。
お前、東京帰って気をつけないと風邪ひくよ、これ。すごい。俺風邪治ったんだけど、また風邪気味になっちゃって。先週は午後誰かいたのかな。最近あいつ来ないな。なんだっけ、笹部。
勉強してるんですよね。
なんかあいつのうちは金持ちみたいだな、あれ。なんか知らないけどさ。いや、勉強してないと思うよ、あいつ。ただいい加減なだけじゃない。先週誰かいたかな。あなただけだったかもしれない。よいしょ。来週なんか新しい人来るって言ってたよ。
あ、そうですか。
うん。女性がなんか来ますからって、宣伝出したのね。お金払って。Facebook に1万円払って、2万円払って。で、このビデオはね、朝鮮の歴史ね、説明してる。まあ、問題なのはね、日本人がわかんないのはやっぱり、英語でしょ？だから呼び名とかなんとかさ、白木とかコークリとかくだらとか言っても、英語違うからね。あと、俺日本語ってなんていうのか知らないけど、セゾンっていうの、昔の国王名前とかね。うん。まあ彼丁寧に説明してくれてるんだよね。母親がアメリカ人かな。でも日本の教育はさ、日本語で教えるって名前ダメだよね。地名とかね。
日本語読みなんです。
絶対、俺も安住婚って、伊藤博文を殺したのは安住婚だけど、僕も韓国語なんていうの知らないんだから、何回聞いてもわかんないね。じゃあ、これやりましょうかね。これ1時間なんだね。
those of us who actually are studying Korea.
彼の英語はね、すごい綺麗な英語。
Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. All of us do who are on this side. Because you guys are taking out 2 weekends of your life, 2 free weekends to come here. So those of us who actually are studying Korea really find it rewarding that you guys would do this. So, huh? Exactly. So I hope that we can do enough to make it worth your while. So I have this very broad mandate from Mary to talk about. And so I first thought I would say hello, 안녕하세요. You've heard a lot about me, but I want to ask a question, which is, why is Korea interesting? And I'm sure you've done this before, but why are you here? There's a number of reasons. I actually would have suspected mostly was because you have students, but then there are a whole bunch of substantive reasons, right? I mean, and the thing is, of course, every country is important, every region is interesting. So in some ways, the question is, why would you take some time out for Korea, right? And so what I'm going to do today is basically, okay, that works. Talk a little bit, just an overview, like what is Korea anyway? Like, what does it look like? How big is it? And then I'm going to talk about basically history, some pre-modern history, which I wrote about before, which makes a great Christmas. Oh, too late. Valentine's gift. Impress your, yeah, right? Anyway, right? But historical Korea, and then talk about the 20th century really quickly. And my goal is not to give you all the facts, but rather to give you a sense of the contours of what Korea has gone through up until today. Because clearly, even if we spent a whole week, I wouldn't be able to do all the details of Korea. But I want you guys to take away some of the things that I find most interesting about why Korea is something worth studying, right? So we'll start. Why should anybody care in the first place? Right? Just in case you don't know where Korea is, you are here. Right? It's really small if you think about it, right? It's not in the center of anything. It's not in the center of Europe or in the center of Asia. It's way up on the side, way up north. But it is worth trying to figure out why it has been so geopolitically important. As I'm sure Mary told you earlier, Korea is interesting geographically because there's a lot of things we say the most, the biggest, etc. in the world, but this is actually true. It's the only place in the world where the interests of the 4 major superpowers literally touch each other. And what I mean by that is, if you go to India or Iran or Iraq, USA is 10,000 miles away, Russia is 10,000, Here, Korea shares land borders with Russia and China. Its closest relation to Japan is 50 miles by ferry. And of course, as many of you know, the United States had at one time 100,000 troops and nuclear weapons on the peninsula. And now we have 30,000 troops. So the 4 biggest economies, the 4 biggest countries in the world are literally nose to nose on the Korean peninsula. And I'm not sure if you guys have heard this before. So here's China, Russia shares this border, here's Japan, the US is there. And we're going to take a minute, and I don't know if you guys have done this yet, but you know how Italy looks like a boot? What does Korea look like? If you sort of squint, what does it look like? Raise your hand. Don't shout it out. In the back. Yeah. A rabbit. Wow, you guys are good. Did you hear this before? You already heard this. No, did you? Okay, where is it, right? Korea looks like a bunny, right? Here's the ears. Here's the little nose. Here's some paws, and here's some paws, right? Now, the interesting thing is that this is sort of traditionally, when I was growing up, this is what we said. But what it's come to be known sort of in international relations is looking like a bunny, not that macho, right? Not manly enough. So Koreans will now tell you that it looks like a tiger. However, and this may not be politically correct, but I submit to you, that is not what you would think of. You know, I mean, you really have to squeeze the tiger to get it in there, right? I mean, I think it looks more like a bunny, frankly, but I will admit a tiger is more macho. So anyway, that's what Korea looks like. Now, how big is Korea? In general, as we know, we tend to think of China and Japan as huge, and Korea as really small. So one thing that we did, you can do, is you can take population and sort of landmass, the size in 1,000 square kilometers, and you put a bunch of Asian countries on there, and it looks sort of what you expect. Japan's big, 130 million people. Thailand, Philippines, South Korea, 45, 50 million people. Singapore is tiny, of course. It's a little city-state, about 4 million people. So yeah, right, there's some really big countries, there's some small countries. But in a way, that doesn't necessarily tell us that much about it. One of the interesting things we can do is, what if we picked up Korea, if we picked it up and we put it in Europe? How big would it be? Because in general, we tend to think of European countries as big, and you know, a lot of these Asian countries as small. So we did the same thing, population and landmass. What's interesting about this chart? Just go ahead and look at it for a minute. Hand? Anybody? Go ahead. Okay, sure, right? I mean, the first thing I would say is Japan is huge, right? With 130 million people, Japan is almost twice the population of Italy, France, UK. Japan is a monster, huge country, if we put it in Europe. And a unified Korea would be roughly the same size as all the European countries. 75, 80 million people. And a land mass roughly the same. It's not like UK, Germany, and Italy are over here, and Korea's down there. I mean, Korea's a big country if you put it in Europe. It's actually not that small. Because we're used to thinking of Germany and France and whatever as being big, right? The problem for Korea, and frankly for Japan, is that this is a false map, because this is really what East Asia looks like. That's Japan down there. That's Thailand. Korea's the 48, right? South Korea. China is huge. China is a continent-sized country. So, of course, compared to China, everybody's small. It's the same way as the United States, right? We are a continent-sized country. Right? So European countries would all be clustered around there, you know, and the U.S. is here. But it's just to give you a sense of the scale, right? For most countries that aren't continent-sized, Korea is actually pretty normal-sized. It's not that small. Now, why also do we care? This is a chart, and I don't have too many charts, but I think this is very interesting. One way we compare is economic development. We all know that Korea... How many of you have a Samsung or an LG phone, TV, etc.? Hyundai car, right? Korea's had an economic miracle in many ways. It's one of the things when I teach my undergrads in my MBA class that we spend time on. How did they grow so fast? But this chart is particularly vivid because it's not just are we richer than we were before. Because every country is basically richer than they were before. No matter how poor they are, you know, cell phones didn't exist, and now you've got people in the poorest of countries who can actually buy a cell phone, right? So they're better off than they were. But often we want to measure, are you catching up to the richest countries, or in this case, the United States. So what this does here is puts economic wealth, per person income, GDP per capita, gross domestic product per capita, or wealth per person, as a percentage of American wealth per person. Okay, so you guys got that, right? If you go back to 1950, the red is Mexico and the blue is Brazil. About 15% as rich. So every Mexican was about 25% as rich as every American per person. You watch, over a generation, by the 1980s, Mexico had risen to 35%. They were beginning to catch up. However, that was short-lived. And so by 2004, Mexico is basically per person as rich as it was 50 years ago. So, yeah, Mexicans today are richer than they were yesterday. Brazilians were at 15%, now they're at 20%, right? But they're not really closing the gap in terms of wealth compared to the United States. The United States is getting richer just as they're getting richer. And sadly, this is the case for most countries around the world outside of Europe. Africa, Latin America, Middle East, many South Asian countries. So why are Korea, Taiwan, these kind of countries so interesting? They started out, green is Taiwan, yellow is Korea. They started out at 10% as rich, 1/10 as rich per person as America in 1950. But rather than a sort of up and down thing, it's almost a direct line upwards. So that by 2004, they're over 50% as rich as the United States. And they've continued to close the gap. These numbers just haven't been updated. So these are countries that have truly closed the gap compared to the United States in terms of economic development. And you can see that if you ever go to Seoul, if anyone goes to Korea, Japan, Taiwan, these countries in many ways are more sophisticated, more technologically intense than American countries. Yes? No, this is just South Korea. We're going to talk about North Korea later, because North Korea has not closed the gap. But the South Korean economy, right? So we have the world's largest shipbuilder is Hyundai, or South Korea, and Hyundai Heavy Industries, right? Samsung and LG are now global brands. So in many ways, we know South Korean companies. They've managed to transform themselves in ways. And that's the one reason, even if you don't have Korean students or direct interactions with Koreans, why it's an interesting story. Because this is truly amazing what the East Asian countries have done, particularly South Korea and Taiwan. How did they do this? How did they catch up and nobody else caught up? I'm not going to answer it here. We're going to move onwards, but I'd be happy to talk about it as we go, right? So, just in the interest of time, I'm going to try and finish with enough time that we can talk about whatever you guys want. But this is just some reasons why we think Korea is interesting, why we might want to study it. So I'm going to talk now about pre-modern Korean history.
His way of presentation. I wanted to study like his style.
And I'm going to leave you with, I want to start with a question, which I don't expect you to be able to answer. But how many times did Japan and China invade Korea? Does anybody know? I mean, I just heard Mary mention it before, so I think it gave away a little bit. But I don't expect you to. I didn't know before I started doing this research. You don't have to give me a number, but does anybody think they could come up with an answer? You guys are too well trained. This will not be on the test. Yeah, I mean, the popular perception is that Korea has just been constantly invaded. We're the small country; the big countries do whatever they want. And I'm going to give you a different story, actually, and one that shows.
So his presentation style for us, it's not impossible like his English sentences and the way of presentation style. I think we can study like his presentation. He don't use difficult word, and he just very simply sentences and very polite way to make presentation. I wanted to study like his way.
A lot more stability in East Asia, which for those of you who do world history or whatever else, is actually, I think, one of the most interesting things about East Asian history, is how it actually worked, right? Because if we go to Europe, and we all know this, right? The history of Europe is a blood-soaked series of unending wars against each other. From the 100 Years' War, the 7 Years' War, the, just on and on and on, right? Napoleon, Trafalgar, etc. In Europe, you had a bunch of similarly sized states, kingdoms, whatever, that spent centuries beating the stuffing out of each other. And the best way to show this is if you put a map. So this is Europe in 1300. We have a whole bunch of political units here that don't exist anymore, right? So there's Crown of Castile or Genoa and Savoy, Duchy of Guienne, whatever, right? A whole bunch of political units. And in fact, the Europe that we know today really didn't even begin to come into focus until the 19th century. So Europe by 1800 is beginning to look like Spain and Portugal. But you still have Sardinia, you still have Naples, the Kingdom of Naples, Torino, Helvetic Republic, the Ottoman Empire. So borders in Europe changed constantly as kingdoms rose and fell and people conquered each other and moved back and forth. The Europe that we know today is actually really recent. Now, in contrast, in East Asia, the four main states of East Asia, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, and China, have basically existed for well over 1,000 years. Their borders changed a little bit, but these are identifiably the same units. And so Korea became Korea around the 7th century. Now, there's a lot of historical debate over this kingdom called Goguryeo. But essentially, there were three kingdoms on the Korean peninsula. Before then, the Baekje, Shilla, and Goguryeo. This Kaya was a smaller thing. Before then, around 200 AD, there were a bunch of little tribes, things back and forth. These kingdoms developed around 200, so that by 600 AD, you had basically three large kingdoms. Yamato Japan, the Japanese state that we know today, it roughly traces its emergence to around the 6th or 7th century. Before then, again, just a bunch of little tribes or something. But there we can trace a political heritage. Now, the interesting thing is that here there was a world war. There was a world war, meaning everybody who could be involved was involved. Right? So the Japanese allied with Baekje, Shilla allied with Tang China. Shilla and Tang crushed Goguryeo. They then beat up Baekje, and the Japanese sent some troops. They sent them home. So there was a massive war, a couple decades, and when the dust settled, you basically had the beginnings of a unified Korean political unit, which covered 2/3 of the peninsula, around 700 AD. And that political unit basically sort of pushed northwards, so that by the 10th century, the border with China was this thing called the Yalu River. So you still have unified Shilla, and it's sort of pushed northwards. By the Chosun dynasty of 1400, they had basically filled out to what it looks like today, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit. Because this region up here, as you may or may not know, the Manchurian region is basically wilderness. It's really cold, it's desolate, it's big mountains, nobody really lives there. So the border that did get demarcated by 1000 AD was the Yalu River. This was the most important border because this is where people from Korea went over to China to trade, and they went back and forth. Up here is just a bunch of wilderness. And over the centuries, the frontier began to turn more and more into a border. So now there's the Yalu and the Tumen rivers. And this right here is, again, wilderness mountains. And that was settled and demarcated between China and Korea in the 18th century, 1711. Now, why is this interesting? Literally 1,000 years, this river has been the border between China and Korea. That's an astonishing amount of stability between two recognizably political units that exist today. The same thing actually in Vietnam. Vietnam and China, Proto-Vietnam at the time, demarcated a border with China at Lan Son. In 1999, when they did the formal modern treaty with the border, it's this exact same place that it had been since basically the 10th century. That's an astonishing amount of stability between political units. They expanded in other directions, into frontiers, but between these political units, an enormous amount of stability. These are deeply, deeply long-lived kingdoms with a sense of who they are and a sense of difference from someone else. Right? Whoops. So how is this actually different from East Asia? In some ways, this is what we call the tribute system, right? There was a set of ideas out there that are very different from modern sense of how you do international relations. I mean, the best example of it is that woven through our ideas of international relations in domestic politics is the idea of equality, right? This is a Enlightenment notion, French Enlightenment notion from the 17th century. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. What's that from? No, right? It's also from, of course, the way that we think about international relations. Once you are a nation state and you're granted diplomatic recognition and you send ambassadors, everybody's the same. So the United States is formally the same as a tiny country like Bolivia. And that's not to criticize Bolivia, but Bolivia is 2 million people. On nothing are they the same in terms of size, power, wealth, anything. 2 million people, 300 million people, right? We've got nuclear weapons, they don't. They're not the same at all, except we're called nation states. So this idea of equality is deeply woven through international relations and in terms of our domestic politics. But as I heard briefly mentioned before, East Asia has a very different historical sense of international relations and what we would call as hierarchic, not equality, which sort of intuitively it wouldn't be. Why would you think that they're the same? They're not the same, but rather a rank order. And the interesting thing is that in Europe, you had an idea of equality, formal equality, informal inequality, because of course there was some countries are bigger, more powerful than others, and endless fighting. And in East Asia, you had formal hierarchy, formal ranking of countries. Informally, the big countries, China, left everybody alone. They didn't really interfere in South Korean or Korean domestic politics at all. So informal equality and centuries of stability. There were sort of two basic norms or practices. One is called investiture, and then the other was just cultural learning. And investiture was basically going through the motions of going to the Chinese emperor and saying, do you approve of me being king? So you send some diplomats to China. The emperor says, of course you can be king, here's a bunch of gifts, and you go home. And the Chinese emperor leaves you alone. Right? Formally, you're saying, yeah, you're an emperor, I'm only a king. But informally, the Chinese didn't care. They just wanted to make sure you understood where the rank order was. Also informally, of course, China at the time was the center of civilization and learning throughout that region. So in many very interesting ways, Koreans were happy to copy. So, and I have to remind my students that this actually isn't a real photo taken from the 12th century, right? But language, up until the invention of the Korean alphabet, and even to this day, Koreans used Chinese characters to write. It was a sign of education, in fact, right? Even if you learn the Korean indigenous way of writing, which is much easier, precisely because it was a local, indigenous way of writing, it was considered more educated and more sophisticated to be able to write in Chinese characters. And everybody around the region used them. Does anybody know what this Chinese character is? Yeah, in English, though. Bone, yeah. Right? I don't know why. I was looking through the web just right, because everybody used the same characters, essentially. Right? There's an examination system. The best way to move up, again, this is very Confucian. Education was the most important thing. Being a rich trader was not. But everybody wanted to be a student of the Confucian classics and get into the government service by passing the civil service exam. It was the only method for social mobility in Korea that was introduced. It's actually, I saw that downstairs. It was introduced roughly in the 9th century. And that was the way that everybody got to be successful. And it's one of the historical roots for why education is so important in Korea today. For centuries, that was the way to success. Being a trader wasn't, being a general was not. There used to be a military exam along with the civil service exam, but it fell into disuse because the military wasn't being used a lot. They even copied the organization of government. There were 6 ministries. There was the king, and there were 6 ministries in China, and there's Koreans who had the 6 ministries, identical. Vietnam had the same 6 ministries. Board of Rights, Board of Punishments, etc. They wore the same insignia. The only difference is Korean insignia started at rank 3. 1 is the highest. So the Chinese had 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. The Koreans started at 3. The highest rank you could get in Korea is 3. Because they weren't going to be the Chinese, but they were using the same kind of thing. Right. Now, what makes this so interesting is like, so there's a set of ideas out there. There's a set of goals. As long as everybody knows where they fit, everything's fine. And a lot of cultural buy-in from Korea. From China. Now, there's indigenous Korean culture as well. Don't get me wrong. There's a deeply indigenous Korean culture, which is not Confucian, which is not hierarchic, which is earthy, egalitarian, and whatever else. And we're going to come back to this. So it wasn't a wholesale copying of Chinese culture any more than, for example, Mexico or Europe is borrowing wholesale from American culture. We're number one today, and people sort of like to borrow some stuff. Everyone wants to learn English. But that doesn't mean they all want to become American and act all like us. But the interesting thing about this, and I heard it again mentioned, is this war, because this is the exception that in some ways proves the rule. In 1592, in Imjinweran, this Japanese general Hideyoshi decided he was going to invade China, and to get there he had to go through Korea. So, what did he do? He invaded, at one point it was almost 200,000 soldiers. They crossed these 50 miles of water on 700 ships and invaded Korea. Korea defended with 60,000 troops. Isun Shin had turtle boats, mercilessly cut their supply lines. And the Chinese ultimately sent, at first they didn't believe the Koreans. Like, you're kidding me. The Japanese are invading us? But eventually they sent troops and helped defend Korea. That was a world war.
How many?
Korea defended these 50 miles of water, 100,000 soldiers. They crossed at one point it was almost 200,000 soldiers.
200,000 soldiers? 200,000 soldiers. 200,000. So many. 20만.
They crossed these 50 miles of water on 700 ships and invaded
700
Korea.
ships?
Korea defended with 60,000 troops. Isun Shin had turtle boats, mercilessly cut their supply lines. And the Chinese ultimately sent, at first they didn't believe the Koreans. Like, you're kidding me. The Japanese are invading us? But eventually they sent troops and helped defend Korea. That was a world war also at the time. Now, what's interesting about this is about the same time, 1588, in Europe, there was the Spanish Armada. You guys have heard of that, right? The Spanish Armada has been called, let me make sure I get this right, the greatest military force ever assembled in Renaissance Europe when the Spanish tried to invade England. And they invaded about 30,000 troops, and they were defeated by about 20,000 English troops. The point is, the war in East Asia was about 5 to 10 times the scale that Europe could even imagine creating. And now this is really interesting, because not only did this war dwarf the scale of European wars. I mean, when these guys decided to fight, they could do it on a scale you could not imagine in Europe. They had the logistical, military, organizational capacity to get together hundreds of thousands of soldiers. So when they decided to fight, they could really fight. And yet, in some ways, this is the only war between the three of these for about 12 centuries. There was that World War I told you about at the beginning, in Goguryeo, when we ended up with the sort of unified Korea. And then you get to 1894, 1870, depending on when you want to call, when the Japanese and Chinese began fighting again. And in between, there's only one war. But they clearly could do it. It's not that they couldn't take 100,000 guys and go across water. And so the question must be, why didn't they fight? And that's what I get to, I talk a lot more in my book. Why didn't they fight more? But also just the mere fact that there weren't that much more fighting is worth noting, especially when we start to compare it to Europe and the incessant invasions between France and Europe. At that time, I actually counted up between 1300 and 1900, there were 43 times that France and England were involved in wars. Right? So this is actually quite interesting, right? So why? These are old, powerful, organized countries. These aren't just a bunch of scattered tribes and walking around not fighting with each other. And that's, in many ways, a fascinating type of question. Yes? Well, there's a difference, right, between pirate invasions, which aren't military, right? What are the pirates normally? I mean, this is actually interesting. Wegu is the title for it, right? Wegu is that woku, I guess is the Japanese word. These were small. They're not pirates like pirates of the Caribbean, right? One guy on a boat. Usually it's a family. Half traders. When trade was difficult, then they would turn to piracy. So absolutely, they could be consequential, right? What would usually happen is it's a raid on a town or something like that, and then somebody leaves. That's very similar to the border wars that America fought for a long time on its borders. Why we created the USS Constitution, right, was to go fight the Barbary Coast pirates, you know, the marine thing, right, from the halls of, you know, to the shores of Tripoli, right? So yes, they're consequential. But we tend to think of wars being government organized, hundreds of thousands of troops. And the pirates they were always a nuisance, the same way they're a nuisance now. But we don't think of the Somali pirates right now as being wars either, right? So yeah, and there's another point that I make. I mean, I could talk about history the whole time, because partly what we're doing then and partly what we're doing now, my one-sentence history of the world, we have enough time for this, right? Actually, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this right here. For anybody, what's the difference between a frontier and a border? Absolutely, right? A border is a line, and a frontier is a space where sort of we have political control here, it peters out, then there's some anarchy, and over there somewhere there's, you know, you begin to get political control. And a border is very clear. It's like, I stop here, you start there. My one-sentence history of the world, not to insult the history teachers, process of turning frontiers into borders. We're trying to do that today in California. We're trying to draw a line that doesn't, the social and cultural ecology of Mexico and California is like this. But we are trying to create a line that's like this. That's pirates, smugglers, drug dealers, immigrants, etc., right? And we tend to think of that as different than the organization of an attempt to conquer the political unit on the other side, right? Where we're going to mobilize an army and send it over to wipe out the other country. And so this is what's interesting. When we talk about these major mobilizations, we have very few. In the interest of time, let me just keep going on, right? Because that all ended in the 20th century. These centuries of stability disappeared with the arrival of the West. And the transformation of East Asia, which had been a very stable international system with extensive trade, with militaries, with countries, trading, diplomats, whatever else. But it was done one way. And then almost overnight, within the space of a generation, the arrival of the West, the beginning of sort of semi-imperialism, colonization of China, and the colonization of everybody else, changed all of East Asia. And so the 20th century is what I'm going to spend the next half hour or so, and then we can talk about whatever you want, right? Which is, for centuries of stability, you see that in the 20th century in Korea and East Asia, extraordinary tumult. Just astonishing amount of change. So we're going to talk about a couple. Japanese imperialism, national division, war, democracy. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about North Korea, because I think, in many ways, I could spend all day talking about North Korea, I'm sure, right? But here's Korea in 1905. This is the King's Palace. This is called Gwanghwamun. It's the main gate to go. How many of you guys have been to Korea? Oh, okay, good number of you. Okay. Have you seen this palace? I mean, this gate? They're fixing it up right now. They're restoring it, right? But this was the main road. The King's Palace is right behind here. It's got good feng shui because there's a mountain in the back, south-facing, water. There's a river right here, Cheonggyecheon, right? Oh, sort of the alignment, the geographic alignment of the energy, of the energy of the world. Yeah. I should not have said that because I have no idea what I'm talking about. Other than that, I don't know anything about feng shui. Or in Korean, they call it pungsu. Well, this was Korea, right? And a bunch of indigenous Koreans running around, right? This looks like Korea. Well, in 1905, and then formally in 1910, Japan colonized Korea. They formally took it over and annexed it, so that Korea no longer existed. Now, you're going to hear a lot about this, I think, both in these classes or if you read about Korea. So I'm not going to say a whole lot here, other than to say from 1910 to 1945 is a period that many Koreans remember or learn about as being extraordinarily harsh. The Japanese came in, there was repression. Over time, they were forced to learn Japanese and were forced to not use their own Korean names. You had to choose a Japanese name.
Okay, what he's talking is just overseas people, American, including American, everybody believe like this. But actually, his expression is not true. But all over the world believes what he said.
My father was born at that time, so he's fluent in Japanese. Right? And they all when they took Japanese names, he said they all tried to use ones that were sort of similar to the Korean name. Right? So a lot of internal resistance, but it was a very, very difficult time. And obviously for Koreans, who had been a strong, proud country, proud of their accomplishments, for literally unified since the 6th century AD, it was extraordinarily humiliating. And the best example I can give that to you, this is the king's palace. And what the Japanese did, in the center of that palace, is build their administrative building right over the top. So here's that same picture. This is the only one I could find. Had I known better, I would have taken pictures when I was there, right? So here is that same Gwanghwamun. And here is the Japanese Imperial Administration building. There can't be a more insulting thing that you do than to put down your building right in front. Even more than that, if you look at it from the top, and I wasn't able to find a picture of this, if you looked at that building from the top, it was written in the Japanese character of sun for Japan. So the building is built as sort of like the Japanese character for Japan. Extraordinarily humiliating, you can imagine, right? If there was, and again, the example, of course, in D.C. in front of the Washington Monument, the Soviets built a big onion dome thing, right? Now, the reason that many of you can't see it today is finally, a couple of years ago, they decided to tear down this building. And they're restoring the palace to what it looked like before, right? So here's another view from the other side of what that palace looked like, and here's the building, right? So it was an extraordinarily difficult time for Koreans. Many came to either China or the United States. Some tried to fight guerrilla, off in the wilderness of Manchuria they tried to fight. Here at USC, we have one of the famous Korean independence activists. We have the house that his family lived in, An Chang-ho. He wrote the Korean national anthem, Dong-hae, ba-ba, right? But he was living here in LA for 20 years as he went to try and fight for independence. So it was a very difficult time. Well, after that, you get independence in 1945, but immediate division of the peninsula into north and south. Right? It was decided in around 1943 by the U.S. and the Soviet Union at the, I think, Malta conference. Stalin and Roosevelt are sitting around with Churchill, and they say, what are we going to do? Let's divide up Germany to make sure that Germany doesn't fight again. Let's divide up the Korean peninsula. You take the northern half, Soviets. I'll take the southern half. We'll demobilize the Japanese troops. Now, the interesting thing about this is, and I'll just briefly talk about this, is this has never all made that much sense to me. I mean, I understand why. The Americans did not want to let the Soviets have the entire peninsula because it's geopolitically important. Why the Soviets agreed to a division is sort of surprising. But even beyond that, this doesn't make any sense to me. We divided up Germany because they started a war. So why didn't we divide up Japan? Right? Why did we divide up Korea and not Japan? The Japanese and Russians had even fought a war in 1904 over the islands. They still dispute to this day the northern territories. Why didn't you divide sort of Soviets get Tokyo and the Americans get Kyoto or something like that? Right? The world would be totally different. Actually, probably all of the Korean Peninsula would be communist. But it's interesting to think. Why did we not divide up Japan? What would the world look like if we had not divided up Korea? And it was totally imposed from the outside.
It's interesting, right?
That being said, it was divided, the beginning of the Cold War. The Korean War, destroyed about 75% of all productive capacity on Korean Peninsula. As you know, the North Koreans invaded, went all the way down to a tiny foothold at Pusan. Then the Americans outflanked them. We went all the way up to the Yalu River. Then the Chinese intervened, and we went all the way back down again. And eventually the war stabilized exactly where it started, in the 38th parallel. The American Air Force ran out of targets to bomb in North Korea. There was nothing left to bomb. And this is Seoul, which changed hands 3 times. Now, in some ways, horrific tragedy. Everybody who's Korean has a memory of the Korean War, lost a friend, lost a brother, or their family is divided. Somebody's in the north, somebody's in the south. About 2 million Koreans died, 10% of the population at the time. So everybody has a story. Now, there's a lot of tragedies in the world, right? So I'm not going to say this is bigger or worse than Soviets losing 20 million in World War II. But it is a horrific tragedy to Koreans. The tragedy today is, and I'll talk about this when I talk about North Korea, we are exactly in the same place as we were in 1953. There has been almost zero change in North-South relations, U.S., whatever, right? We have still a divided peninsula, Cold War, etc., etc. Except North Korea now has a couple nukes. It's the only difference. Right? Nothing has changed basically in 60 years. Seoul, on the other hand, the benefit, and again, I would never give this as a policy prescription. Have a horrible, horrific war that wipes out 10% of your population, because then you'll get to rebuild. But in fact, you did get a chance to rebuild. And what South Korea was able to do, this is the Han River, this is Seoul. And after the Korean War, basically everybody got to start over in 1950. So not just with infrastructure. Here's the Gwanghwamun with the gate again. Here's 1980. You can see there's the mountains around Seoul, some buildings, and here we are today, right? You can't even see. Somewhere over there is, downtown, right? Unrecognizable from what it was like in 1950 or 1900. So this is the benefit. Like, again, I'm not going to suggest countries do this, but they got a chance to start over, and it wasn't just physical. Social classes got screwed up. Everything was up for grabs. So there was no ruling class, peasants, etc. I mean, there were, but with the war and colonization and division, basically everybody got a chance to start over. So enormous transition, right? Now, during the Cold War, there were a whole bunch of military governments, coups d'etat. And in fact, no leader between 1948 and 1987, so for almost 40 years, no South Korean leader had voluntarily left office. They had all either been kicked out, assassinated, or exiled. So here's the same famous Gwanghwamun Gate, right? Military law. There was one dictator who ruled, then he got killed by his own CIA guy, and another one took over in 1979, killed about 2,000 citizens, between 500 and 2,000 of his own citizens to keep power. Right? We remember Tiananmen. We don't remember Gwangju, because Tiananmen's bad Chinese and Gwangju was our ally, so we sort of ignored it. These were brutal, repressive governments. By the 1980s, here's the Gwangju protest, people taking over, right? By the 1980s, there had been enough economic development, and sort of the world is changing in different ways, that South Koreans in millions began to enter the streets. And we had a very dramatic democratic transition in 1987. When the president at the time decided not to call out the troops, and he left office voluntarily. And since then, for the last 24 years, we've had, here are democracy demonstrations in 1987. And here's one thing about Koreans, which I will point out, right? This is the other side. This is not a sort of you're the king, we're the peasants, you can do whatever you want. When Koreans aren't happy with something, they let you know. which is really interesting, right? There is a deeply, I'm not going to call it democratic, but egalitarian strand in Korean society, which says, I'm as good as anybody, and it's my right to tell you what to do. And they didn't like what the government was doing, and now we have democracy today. stable, placid. It is interesting, right? I mean, it's still evolving, and it is fun. It is fun to do this because they literally spray each other with fire hoses and beat each other up and stuff. At the same time, it's a young democracy, and we had in the United States 200 years ago we had what do you call it, duels, right? It took us a long time to get to where we are today. Where even though we hate it, actually, I'm not sure. I think we're going backwards right now. But you know, I was going to say, even though you may hate the other guy, you're like my respected senator from Nebraska or whatever, right? Everything but it is a democracy. There have been peaceful transfers of power despite this. There's no worry that the military is going to come out. I mean, Korea has a lot of things to be proud of. The economic development, this transition to democracy. I should put another picture on, but like people vote, right? There is a movement towards better freedom of press, freedom of speech, things like that, right? There's a lot of stuff. If you go to Korea in 1910 or 1950, you would not bet on this country having done this. There's no way, if you looked at Korea in 1950, you'd say, that's a country that's going to be an economic miracle that everybody's going to know about around the world. And is going to be a stable democracy. Right? So in many ways, this is really interesting how Korea is going. The 20th century was extraordinarily tumultuous for Korea. Colonization, division, war, military coups d'etat, up until the late 1980s. Millions of people in the street protesting for democracy. So that transition, though, Korea has managed the transition to modernity quite well, given the kinds of things it had on its plate, so to speak. Roughly now, let me talk about North Korea. And I'll make 2 points. I really only have 1 point, and then we have plenty of time to talk about whatever you want. And my 1 point is basically this, and I wonder, do I have it up here? No, I don't. Okay. My point is this, right? 24 million human beings. It's true, I did get quoted occasionally a couple weeks ago. The thing that I found most disturbing about the death of Kim Jong-il, about the way that we in America responded to it, is this roar, a roar of every person who had ever eaten Korean food was like an authority giving an interview or blogging or something, right? Or had been to Seoul, been to the airport. It was astonishing how many people were like instant experts on North Korea. Not only that, if they had something good to say, it would be true. But the way that we view North Korea, everybody was doing this. There was the few voices of reason, totally drowned out by the morons who are talking about they're brainwashed, they're robots, they're idiots, they're crazy, right? And we tend to forget. The one thing I want you to take away, if you take away anything from today's talk, it would be actually this, which is there are 22 million human beings out there. And they think they're normal. They don't think they're weird and crazy and stuff like that. So I'm going to talk to you about that a little bit. Because it is very easy for us to just do this. Now, granted, The Economist is very funny. I give them credit. I love this, This is, who's this? Kim Jong-il. He just died. And by the way, he was inconsiderate in death as in life. He died right before Christmas. Like, come on. He ruined my Christmas. Right? But yeah, it's easy to laugh at this guy. Sort of pudgy. He looks weird, right? This was taken in 2000, the first time that the South and North Korean leaders had ever met. They got together, they had a summit meeting. And to their credit, the reason they're saying this is because people were surprised that he could actually speak normally, that he wasn't foaming at the mouth and stuff like that. Right? And he was. He could speak very, very smoothly. And in fact, he showed a lot of respect to the South Korean leader who was older than him. South Korea is very hierarchic, a very Confucian thing. The South Korean leader was 20 years older than him. He used the right types of words that you would use to someone who is 20 years older. Right? He wasn't trying to speak as an equal or anything else. Right? So anyway, yeah, greetings, Earthlings. Take me to your leader. But this is the way that we tend to think about North Korea. Right? But in many ways, North Korea is more Korean than South Koreans. I mean, South Koreans, in doing all the cool stuff they've done, globalization, economic development, democracy, right? You go to Seoul today, it's a global city. People's values have changed. They're sort of Korean, you know, but they're global people now. Right? North Korea, in some ways, is stuck in a time warp. It's the same way they've been doing things for 100 years. Most of these pictures are taken by Russian tourists. Although, again, we have a lot more access to North Korea now than we ever had before. So they're still using, you know, cows and stuff like this. This is my favorite picture, and I almost fell over when I saw that picture a couple of years ago. Because this, does anybody know what this is, basically? Yeah, ice skates, right? When you don't have ice skates, you take a block of wood and 2 sticks. The rivers freeze over. It's way north up there, right? Anybody from New Hampshire? It's worse than that, right? You take a block of wood and 2 sticks and you go around, right? So they're sort of proto-ice skates. Now, the amazing thing, my father was born in the 1930s. He also was born in northern Korea. They came south as refugees right before the war. And when I saw that, the reason I almost fell over is my father, when I was growing up, he would tell me stories about him growing up. And he said, back in the 30s, we used to take a block of wood and 2 sticks, right? And he actually even drew me a picture of it. And when I saw this, I was like, nothing has changed. Literally nothing has changed. And I actually found the picture that he drew. I went home and looked at it, right? So this is them, right? This is the rice paddies. Actually, I found it. It was in a box at home last year, and I found it, right? One interesting thing, North Koreans were the first to adopt Christianity. They were the ones, it was much more receptive in the northern part of Korea than the south in the early 20th century. Interestingly enough, Billy Graham and now his son have been regularly preaching in North Korea since the 1980s. Because Kim Il-sung's mother, was one of the first people to become Christian in, again, 1910s. So he always had a pretty warm spot in his heart for the American missionaries who he had grown up with. Obviously, it's not freedom of religion right now. But, you know, and the point that I make is that they think they're normal. And what I mean by that is it's very easy for us to exoticize them. To put a bunch of caricatures on them. Right? They all walk around, they're all brainwashed, they're all walking around like automatons. Right? But you look at these little kids, they're very cute, right? This is where they're growing up. This is their home. This is their family. This is where they went to school. Right? They're like anybody else, where they have to get along, they have to live, they have to survive. But, you know, they wake up in the morning, they worry about their baby, they go to work, fight with your wife. She doesn't look that happy, right? But, you know, like, it actually, if you start to think from the perspective, not maybe of the elite is one thing, maybe 500,000, 1 million people who are truly in the ruling elite. But the rest of the people, even if you have a middle-class job, you're a teacher or you're a farmer, you just grow up. And this is where you had your first crush. I like this picture. Why? You never see a North Korean soldier smiling, right? But I'll bet they actually make jokes once in a while. And the interesting thing, we have a postdoc at USC who has actually interviewed anthropologists, extensively interviewed about 36 North Korean refugees. Open-ended questions, days long, getting to know them. What was your hometown like? You know, not what was the famine, what do you think about Kim Jong-il, but letting it come from them. The interesting thing she says is, they know that there's a difference here, and there are things they don't like. The best example she gives is, you know, but you've got to eat, you've got to have a job. There's a Korean word for the black market, which was essentially illegal up until a couple of years ago, when you could do private trading. And then there's the state-run 백화점, the state-owned store, supermarket. But of course, you go to the state-owned supermarket, you can't buy anything. There's nothing in there, right? On the walls, there's a couple, you know, really nice things, but you can't buy anything. And so when they would go to the black market, because that's the only place you could get things, they wouldn't say, I'm going to the black market. They would say, I'm going to the supermarket. You know, I'm going to the 백화점. And everybody knew what they meant. Everybody knew it was a sort of sly reference to the failings of the government. But it's a way in which people negotiate the reality of their lives versus what they can do about it. And the ways that they can set meanings for themselves that help them understand, okay, I get it. This doesn't work, this does. These are kids on the east coast of North Korea. Right? Like kids anywhere, when somebody shows up to take a photo, they all go running over. These are kids too young to even remember the famine of the mid-1990s.
He just takes several pictures showing ordinary people. This is very important for considering democracy.
And the vast majority of North Koreans are like that. The same way here. I may not like what the government's doing, but there's very little that I can do about it. Even in America where I can vote. Right? Or frankly, our state government. It seems to be even more right? So what do? You go along and get along. Some would leave if they could. Probably others will stay. But we forget that they're actually human beings. Are things changing? A little bit. Who's that? Yeah, right, you already saw it, right? But so this is interesting. Everyone has to wear a lapel pin of Kim Il-sung, the former great leader. So here's the schoolboy wearing a lapel pin with an Adidas knockoff hat. And of course, here we have a cocoa carbonated drink. Yongjin, right? I mean, there are things that are changing. Some more slowly than others. But to view North Korea as an unchanging, everybody thinks the same way is an enormous mistake. And it only makes it harder for us to have appropriate policies towards North Korea. Now, who is this? You guys all know this, right? This is the third son, Kim Jong-un. Pardon? Well, this is the thing. So the joke, because we had no pictures. To this day, we don't know how old he is. We know he's below 30 years old, right? That's how little we know about him. And up until last year, we had no photos of him at all. So he was anointed last year, and he started to show up. He's 28, 29 years old. So the joke that went around, sort of a grim joke, but the joke that went around after we finally saw pictures of him is, now we know where all the food aid went. Because he clearly is not hungry. Right? So, I'll conclude my point about North Korea just by saying that it is easy to forget that there's people up there because they don't want you to think there's people up there, first of all. And nothing has changed. We are basically in exactly the same position we were in 1953. We are in what I call a new Cold War. We tried engagement for a little bit. For whatever reasons, we decided not to. So what do we do now? North and South Korea view each other as the main enemy. We do muscle flexing and name calling and the same kind of thing. We have no intention really of changing. They have no intention really of changing. And we're in the same place. And it's not clear. I mean, something may change with this new guy, but it's not at all clear. I mean, people like the favorite parlor game is, will they survive, will they not, will they collapse? They've survived far longer than anyone else expected. They could collapse tomorrow. But my feeling is if they didn't collapse in the mid-1990s with a horrific famine that killed maybe 1 million people, with intense U.S. pressure, they're better off than they were 15 years ago in that sense. So I don't think anything will change for anytime soon. But you never know. Yeah, we'll talk about them. Let me just conclude very briefly, and then we can talk about whatever you want, right? So why is Korea interesting? I think there's a number of reasons beyond the fact that I happen to be Korean American and I care. First of all, North Korea remains a major international security problem for the entire region and for the United States. If North Korea was gone, the whole region would look different if that was not a problem. Obviously, the economic success and democracy in South Korea. As for your students, they're here to stay. They're not moving back. Someone may, but I mean, there are, 2, 3, 4 million Korean Americans in America. And they're going to be here. And Koreans are very proud, passionate people. Not emotional, just passionate. So, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Okay, this is his history of Korea. He is very good speaking, right? And English is like we wanted to study, like his way of presentation style, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I like it. So I think we have a couple video I want to show you. One is Samson is grandson of Samson, founder, arrested for bribe. He is. This is a very short video. Oops, I have a copy already. Oh my God. Oh, okay. Oh, here it comes. This is Korean. Speak Korean.
아침마다 주무시고 계시는 우리 남편 옆에 깨웁니다. 아침마다 서울 지하철 9호선을 타고 출근합니다. 9호선은 삼성이 건축했습니다. 삼성은 우리나라 위해서 너무 많은 것을 합니다. 그리고 전자공학지에 되게 유명한 회사입니다. 그거는 다 아닙니다. 삼성 계열사는 약 80 정도 됩니다. 저희 아버지는 삼성에 일하셨습니다. 제가 어렸을 때 회사위원회 덕분에 아버지가 삼성 놀이공원 에버랜드에 같이 많이 가주셨어요. 기억납니다. 되게 재밌었어요. 현재는 저희 가족이랑 삼성 주거 단지에 삽니다. 한국에 많습니다. 그리고 저희 거는 되게 아름답고 되게 편합니다. 부족한 게 없습니다. 그거에다가 삼성의료원에 가깝습니다. 삼성의료원은 한국의 최고 병원입니다. 저기서 저희 아들이 태어났습니다. 삼성은 우리나라의 최고 회사입니다. 너무 많은 거를 하셔가지고 기억을 다 못하지만 이 해를 들어 원자력 발전도 건축했었고요. 화력 발전도 건축합니다. 또는 석유화과 공업단지도 건축합니다. 서울시청, 인천다리, 그것도 삼성입니다. 그리고 우리나라의 제일 큰 항구도 부산, 그것도 삼성입니다. 세계적으로 제일 큰 조선소들 중에 삼성중공 조선소도 있습니다. 그것은 거제 섬에 있습니다. 그리고 제가 다녔던 이화여 대학교 어떤 부분들도 삼성이 건축했습니다. 저희 남편은 성균관 대학교 반도체 시스템 공학과 졸업했습니다. 그리고 성균관 대학교는 1997년에 삼성이 취직했습니다. 또는 삼성은 저희 남편 박사를 5년 동안 출자했습니다. 삼성에 일한 지 이제 10년 됐습니다. 제가 처음 공유했을 때 회사가 저한테 꽃이랑 케이크를 보내주셨습니다. 꽃은 되게 예뻤었는데 케이크는 뭐 괜찮았었어요. 저희 가족이랑 저희 친구 그리고 옆집 사람들도 다들 뿌듯했었습니다. 저희 남편과 저랑 삼성을 만났습니다. 만난 뒤에 1년 안에 강남에 있는 삼성전자 타워 5층에 결혼했습니다. 저기는 직원들이 비용 많이 안 들고 결혼식을 할 수 있습니다. 결혼식은 되게 아름다웠습니다. 너무 행복했었어요. 결혼식 날에 삼성 타워 밑에 시위가 있었습니다. 사실 시위가 있었던 이유는 기억이 잘 안 납니다. 자주 있습니다. 그리고 신문에 많이 나옵니다. 지난번에는 어떤 직원이 자살을 했습니다. 자살한 이유는 근무 조건 항해해서 자살을 했습니다. 그분 부인입니다. 그분 딸입니다. 그분 일했던 곳입니다. 이 사진은 그 직원의 장례식입니다. 삼성은 자기 잘못이 아니라고 사과를 공고 안 했습니다. 이 남자는 장례식에 가셨습니다. 역사적으로 처음으로 삼성 회사의 노동조합을 창조했습니다. 75년 안에 처음이었습니다. 시작했을 때부터 삼성은 노동조합을 금지했었습니다. 근데 공식적으로는 회사는 자기 직원들 잘 챙깁니다. 제가 읽었는데요. 삼성이 그 남자를 협박하고 잘렸습니다. 그리고 또 에버랜드 놀이공원 식당 예전 매니저도 그 사람이 노동조합을 창조하려고 했었는데 이제 삼성이 그 남자를 소추한 지 3년째입니다. 반도체 공장에 화학제품 접촉 문제도 들었습니다. 이 여자 남편이 삼성 기술자였는데 백혈병 때문에 돌아가셨어요. 그리고 지금 웃고 계시는 여자는 LCD 화면을 조립하다가 뇌암이 진단을 내렸습니다. 수술 때부터 인식과 신체적인 능력이 감퇴됐습니다. 그의 어머니는 그때부터 쉬지 없이 옆에 계십니다. 논쟁들 불구하고 우리나라에서는 삼성이 명망이 높은 회사입니다. 예를 들어서 우리나라의 제일 높은 입금을 받습니다. 그리고 회사가 이익을 많이 받을 때 직원들 상여금을 많이 받습니다. 하지만 직원으로서는 생산력이 있어야 합니다. 저는 가끔 하루에 14시간 공부하고 집에 들어갑니다. 집에 되게 늦게 들어갑니다. 가족이랑 보는 시간이 별로 없어요. 하지만 주말에는 시간을 많이 같이 보내요. 지난 토요일에 우리 아들이랑 야구 게임을 보러 갔어요. 우리 아들이 제일 좋아하는 팀, 삼성 라이온즈. 삼성이 일하는 자체는 되게 뿌듯합니다. 그리고 나중에 제가 은퇴할 때 조거 단지에 친구들이랑 하루 종일 고스톱을 칠 수 있을 거예요. 그때 우리 아들이 삼성 큰 가족에 들어가 있었으면 좋겠어요. 하지만 지금은 우리 남편 옆에 잠듭니다. 그리고 눈을 감습니다.
This is Samsung advertisement video. Not advertisement, some explaining Samsung video is very. And the other one is I prepared one. This is Samsung advertisement video. And I think we have more to this one, but very few minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. This is 3 minutes. This one is 7 minutes. This one is no 3 minutes. Another 3 minutes. This is China. This put some sanction for South Korea, and they had very heavy impact for their economy. So I put this video this morning. So this about in total 6 or 7 minutes. So I'm going to do it next week. Already Ed came here now. So next week is actually I try to get into which country? Oh, Australia. Oh my God, Australia.
So, what's so special about Australia?
Next Australia. It's Southeast Asia.
Man, but they're kind of like pseudo-British, no?
Pseudo-British, but this Australia is very, very heavy favor for China. So this is very special in Asian country. White people, but actually they are not white. They are shake hands with mainland China instead of the other surrounding countries. So this is interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly like Britain, right?
Britain is. But
they're also free riding AIB.
They are, EU.
Yeah.
But Australia is China. Okay, Takashi, any questions?
No.
South Korea is an interesting country, and three major issues. One is they do not have, not like Japan, they have core mental, spirits. They don't. Swaying left and right, China and the United States. Second is Korea has a sad history in the past, more than 1,000 years.
It's called pragmatism. That's the core.
Huh? Core.
If you explain it like that, that's just like us. It's called pragmatism.
Core pragmatism.
Pragmatism. That's the core. Basically, if you're always kind of like flexible in your approach, then your approach is always pragmatic.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually one of the core values in Western European culture.
What do you mean, core value?
One of the core values is pragmatism.
Swaying?
If there's something that people in the Netherlands hate, it's dogmatism.
Oh.
It's considered to be retarded and
Is this good meaning, bad meaning?
Pragmatic it has a good meaning.
But this Korea is bad meaning.
For you, but how about them?
And second, Korea is a character is Han. Is in his history, it's always embedded. And the third Korean problem is Samsung occupies this country. This actually not socialism one party. This is one company occupied democracy. So this is one of tragedy. It means more than half of people is a small size company. They are very poor, rather than Samsung. Only Samsung employees are rich, but ordinary people is poor. But government is very close to Samsung, and so they can take care of poor people. So this is South Korea. And also, finally, military regime continued 40 years after World War II. And democracy just only short 3 decades. The democratic country only 3 decades. So even the democratic country, we are not so much familiar with what this democracy means. So it means in their future, they have a lot of turmoil ahead waiting for them. And Japanese people need to talk with at the same level of eye contact. Must consider for them more higher level than Korean people. Don't respond what they ask, what they request, what they claim, like a comfort woman, like workers before World War II. They sort of claim they're going to complain for against us, but we don't treat like at the same level with no solution. Okay, so today's South Korea is finished, and next week I'm going to spend another 6 minutes or 10 minutes closing down for South Korea's issues, especially for Samsung issues, and the other one is China sanction against Korea. Then I want to get into Australia. Australia is a very interesting country. So, okay. So I'm going to succeed to Ed. He's waiting for us. Okay, Ed, why don't you sit here?
Yes.
Okay, Takashi, I'll cut your line, okay? And he's going to connect to you again. Okay. I wake up 3:30 this morning.
Yeah. I went to bed 2:30.
Hey, no kidding. So I show him video. I just was sleeping for a while. He is also he told me he wake up sleep.
Really?
How come? I don't know. Okay, he come here. I don't know.
Hoi.
You said 2 o'clock in the morning?
2:30. It's very busy at the moment. I was late because I got all kinds of list of guests.
It means you got a lot of money.
Yeah. well. A lot of headaches.
Let's get money, no problem.